Chapter 36 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice. Chapter 36 Why Koth Was Contradicted. Then Jurgen went back to Korasma, where Koth, the son of Smoit and Steinvor, stood conscientiously in the midst of the largest and hottest flame he had been able to imagine, and rebuked the outworn devils who were tormenting him, because the tortures they inflicted were not adequate to the wickedness of Koth. And Jurgen cried to his father, "The lewd fiend Kanagasta told you I was the Emperor of Numeria, and I do not deny it even now. But do you not perceive I am likewise your son Jurgen?" "Why, so it is," said Koth, "now that I look at the rascal. And how, Jurgen, did you become an emperor?" "Oh, sir, and is this a place wherein to talk about mere earthly dignities? I am surprised your mind should still run upon these empty vanities, even here in torment." "But it is inadequate torment, Jurgen, such as does not salve my conscience. There is no justice in this place, and no way of getting justice. For these shiftless devils do not take seriously that which I did, and they merely pretend to punish me, and so my conscience stays unsatisfied." "Well, but, father, I have talked with them, and they seem to think your crimes do not amount to much after all." Koth flew into one of his familiar rages. "I would have you know that I killed 8 men in cold blood, and held 5 other men while they were being killed. I estimate the sum of such iniquity as 10.5 murders, and for these my conscience demands that I be punished." "Ah, but, sir, that was 50 years or more ago, and these men would now be dead in any event, so you see it does not matter now." "I went astray with women, with I do not know how many women." Jurgen shook his head. "This is very shocking news for a son to receive, and you can imagine my feelings. None the less, sir, that also was 50 years ago, and nobody is bothering over it now." "You jackanapes, I tell you that I swore, and I stole, and I forged, and burned 4 houses, and broke the Sabbath, and was guilty of mayhem, and spoke disrespectfully to my mother, and worshipped a stone image at Poruzza. I tell you, I shattered the whole Decalogue time and again. I committed all the crimes that were ever heard of, and invented 6 new ones." "Yes, sir," said Jurgen, "but still, what does it matter if you did?" "Oh, take away this son of mine," cried Koth, "for he is his mother all over again, and though I was the vilest sinner that ever lived, I have not deserved to be plagued twice with such silly questions, and I demand that you loitering devils bring more fuel." "Sir," said a panting little fiend in the form of a tadpole with hairy arms and legs like a monkey's, as he ran up with 4 bundles of faggots, "we are doing the very best we can for your discomfort. But you damned have no consideration for us, and do not remember that we are on our feet day and night waiting upon you," said the little devil, whimpering, as with his pitchfork he raked up the fire about Koth. "You do not even remember the upset condition of the country, on account of the war with heaven, which makes it so hard for us to get you all the inconveniences of life. Instead you lounge in your flames, and complain about the service, and Grandfather Satan punishes us, and it is not fair." "I think myself," said Jurgen, "that you should be gentler with the boy. And as for your crime, sir, come, will you not conquer this pride which you nickname conscience, and concede that after any man has been dead a little while it does not matter at all what he did? Why, about Belgard, no one ever thinks of your throat-cutting and Sabbath-breaking, except when very old people gossip over the fire, and your wickedness brightens up the evening for them. To the rest of us, you are just a stone in the churchyard, which describes you as a paragon of all the virtues. And outside of Belgard, sir, your name and deeds mean nothing now to anybody, and no one anywhere remembers you. So really, your wickedness is not bothering any person now save these poor toiling devils. And I think that, in consequence, you might consent to put up with such torments as they can conveniently contrive, without complaining so intemperately about it." "Ah, but my conscience, Jurgen, that is the point." "Oh, if you continue to talk about your conscience, sir, You restrict the conversation to matters I do not understand, and so cannot discuss. But I dare say we will find occasion to thresh this out, and all other matters by and by. And you and I will make the best of this place, for now I will never leave you." Koth began to weep, and he said that his sins in the flesh had been too heinous for this comfort to be permitted him in the unendurable torment which he had fairly earned, and hoped some day to come by. "Do you care about me one way or the other, then?" said Jurgen, quite astounded. And from the midst of his flame, Koth, the son of Smoit, talked of the birth of Jurgen, and of the infant that had been Jurgen, and of the child that had been Jurgen. And a horrible, deep, unreasonable emotion moved in Jurgen as he listened to the man who had begotten him, and whose flesh was Jurgen's flesh, and whose thoughts had not ever been Jurgen's thoughts, and Jurgen did not like it. Then the voice of Koth was bitterly changed, as he talked of the young man that had been Jurgen, of the young man who was idle and rebellious and considerate of nothing save his own light desires, and of the division which had arisen between Jurgen and Jurgen's father Koth spoke likewise, and Jurgen felt better now, but was still grieved to know how much his father had once loved him. "It is lamentably true," says Jurgen, "that I was an idle and rebellious son. So I did not follow your teachings. I went astray, oh, very terribly astray. I even went astray, sir, I must tell you, with a nature myth connected with the moon." "Oh, hideous abomination of the heathen!" "And she considered, sir, that thereafter I was likely to become a solar legend." "I should not wonder," said Koth, and he shook his bald and dome-shaped head despondently. "Ah, my son, it simply shows you what comes of these wild courses." "And in that event I would, of course, be released from sojourning in the underworld by the spring equinox. Do you not think so, sir?" says Jurgen very coaxingly, because he remembered that, according to Satan, whatever Koth believed would be the truth in hell. "I am sure," said Koth. "Why, I am sure I do not know anything about such matters." "Yes, but what do you think?" "I do not think about it at all." "Yes, but—" "Jurgen, you have a very uncivil habit of arguing with people." "Still, sir, and I have spoken to you about it before." "Yet, father—" "And I do not wish to have to speak to you about it again." "None the less, sir, and when I say that I have no opinion—" "But everybody has an opinion, father." Jurgen shouted this, and felt it was quite like old times. "How dare you speak to me in that tone of voice, sir?" "But I only meant—" "Do not lie to me, Jurgen, and stop interrupting me. For, as I was saying when you began to yell at your father, as though you were addressing an unreasonable person, it is my opinion that I know nothing whatever about equinoxes, and do not care to know anything about equinoxes, I would have you understand. And that the less said as to such disreputable topics the better, as I tell you to your face." And Jurgen groaned. "Here is a pretty father. If you had thought so, it would have happened. But you imagine me in a place like this, and have not sufficient fairness, far less paternal affection, to imagine me out of it. I can only think of your well-merited affliction, you quarrelsome scoundrel, and the host of light women with whom you have sinned, and the doom of which has befallen you in consequence." "Well, at worst," says Jurgen, "there are no women here. That ought to be a comfort to you." "I think there are women here," snapped his father. "It is reputed that quite a number of women have had consciences, but these conscientious women are probably kept separate from us men, in some other part of hell, for the reason that if they were admitted into Korasma, they would attempt to tidy the place and make it habitable. I know your mother would have been meddling out of hand." "Oh, sir, and must you still be finding fault with mother?" "Your mother, Jurgen, was in many ways an admirable woman, but," said Koth, "she did not understand me." "Ah, well, that may have been the trouble. Still, all this you say about women being here is mere guesswork." "It is not," said Koth, "and I want none of your impudence either. How many times must I tell you that?" Jurgen scratched his ear reflectively, for he still remembered what Grandfather Satan had said, and Koth's irritation seemed promising. "Well, but the women here are all ugly, I wager." "They are not," said his father angrily. "Why do you keep contradicting me?" "Because you do not know what you're talking about," says Jurgen, egging him on. "How could there be any pretty women in this horrible place? For the soft flesh would be burned away from their little bones, and the loveliest of queens would be reduced to a horrid cinder." "I think there are any number of vampires and succubi and such creatures, whom the flames do not injure at all, because these creatures are informed with an ardor that is unquenchable and is more hot than fire. And you understand perfectly what I mean, so there is no need for you to stand there goggling at me like a horrified abbess." "Oh, sir, but you know very well that I would have nothing to do with such unregenerate persons." "I do not know anything of the sort. You are probably lying to me. You always lied to me. I think you are on your way to meet a vampire now." "What, sir, a hideous creature with fangs and leathery wings?" "No, but a very poisonous and seductively beautiful creature." "Come now, you do not really think she is beautiful?" "I do think so. How dare you tell me what I think and do not think?" "Ah, well, I shall have nothing to do with her." "I think you will," said his father. "Ah, but I think you will be up to your tricks with her before this hour is out. For do I not know what emperors are, and do I not know you?" And Koth fell to talking of Jurgen's past, in the customary terms of a family squabble, such as are not very nicely repeatable elsewhere. And the fiends who had been tormenting Koth withdrew in embarrassment, and so long as Koth continued talking, they kept out of earshot. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice. Chapter 37, Invention of the Lovely Vampire. So again Koth parted with his son in anger, and Jurgen returned again toward Barathum. And whether or not it was a coincidence, Jurgen met precisely the vampire of whom he had inveigled his father into thinking. She was the most seductively beautiful creature that it would be possible for Jurgen's father or any other man to imagine, and her clothes were orange-colored, for a reason sufficiently well known in hell, and were embroidered everywhere with green fig leaves. "A good morning to you, madam," says Jurgen, "and whither are you going?" "Why, to no place at all, good youth, for this is my vacation, granted yearly by the law of Kalki." "And who is Kalki, madam?" "Nobody as yet, but he will come as a stallion. Meanwhile his law precedes him, so that I am spending my vacation peacefully in hell, with none of my ordinary annoyances to bother me." "And what, madam, can they be?" "Why, you must understand that it is little rest a vampire gets on earth, with so many fine young fellows like yourself going about everywhere eager to be destroyed." "But how, madam, did you happen to become a vampire if the life does not please you? And what is it that they call you?" "My name, sir," replied the vampire sorrowfully, "is Florimel, because my nature, no less than my person, was as beautiful as the flowers of the field, and as sweet as the honey which the bees, who furnish us with such admirable examples of industry, get out of these flowers. But a sad misfortune changed all this. For I chanced one day to fall ill and die, which of course might happen to anyone, and as my funeral was leaving the house, the cat jumped over my coffin. That was a terrible misfortune to befall a poor dead girl so generally respected, and in wide demand as a seamstress, though even then the worst might have been averted had not my sister-in-law been of what they call a humane disposition, and foolishly attached to the cat. So they did not kill it, and I, of course, became a vampire." "Yes, I can understand that was inevitable. Still, it seems hardly fair. I pity you, my dear." And Jurgen sighed. "I would prefer, sir, that you did not address me thus familiarly, since you and I have omitted the formality of an introduction, and in the absence of any joint acquaintances are unlikely ever to meet properly." "I have no herald handy, for I travel incognito. However, I am that Jurgen who recently made himself Emperor of Numeria, King of Eubonia, Prince of Cocaine, and Duke of Lagreus, and of whom you have doubtless heard." "Why, to be sure," says she, patting her hair straight. "And who would have anticipated meeting your Highness in such a place?" "One says Majesty to an emperor, my dear. It is a detail, of course, but in my position one has to be a little exigent." "I perfectly comprehend, your Majesty, and indeed I might have divined your rank from your lovely clothes. I can but entreat you to overlook my unintentional breach of etiquette, and I make bold to add that a kind heart reveals the splendor of its graciousness through the interest which your Majesty has just evinced in my disastrous history." "Upon my word," thinks Jurgen, "but in this flow of words I seem to recognize my father's imagination when in anger." Then Florimel told Jurgen of her horrible awakening in the grave, and of what had befallen her hands and feet there, the while that against her will she fed repugnantly, destroying first her kindred and then the neighbors. This done, she had arisen. "For the cattle still lived, and that troubled me. When I had put an end to this annoyance, I climbed into the church belfry, not alone, for one went with me of whom I prefer not to talk, and at midnight I sounded the bell so that all who heard it would sicken and die. And I wept all the while, because I knew that when everything had been destroyed which I had known in my first life in the flesh, I would be compelled to go into new lands in search of the food which alone can nourish me, and I was always sincerely attached to my home. So it was, your Majesty, that I forever relinquished my sewing, and became a lovely peril, a flashing desolation, and an evil which smites by night, in spite of my abhorrence of irregular hours. And what I do I dislike extremely, for it is a sad fate to become a vampire, and still to sympathize with your victims, and particularly with their poor mothers." So Jurgen comforted Florimel, and he put his arm around her. "Come, come," he said, "but I will see that your vacation passes pleasantly, and I intend to deal fairly with you too." Then he glanced sidewise at his shadow, and whispered a suggestion which caused Florimel to sigh. "By the terms of my doom," said she, "at no time during the 9 lives of the cat can I refuse. Still, it is a comfort you are the Emperor of Numeria and have a kind heart." "Oh, and many other possessions, my dear, and I again assure you that I intend to deal fairly with you." So Florimel conducted Jurgen through the changeless twilight of Barathum, like that of a grey winter afternoon, to a quiet cleft by the sea of blood, which she had fitted out very cosily in imitation of her girlhood home, and she lighted a candle and made him welcome to her cleft. And when Jurgen was about to enter it, he saw that his shadow was following him into the vampire's home. "Let us extinguish this candle," says Jurgen, "for I have seen so many flames today that my eyes are tired." So Florimel extinguished the candle, with a good will that delighted Jurgen. And now they were in utter darkness, and in the dark nobody can see what is happening. But that Florimel now trusted Jurgen and his Numerian claims was evinced by her very first remark. "I was in the beginning suspicious of your Majesty," said Florimel, "because I had always heard that every emperor carried a magnificent sceptre, and you then displayed nothing of the sort. But now, somehow, I do not doubt you any longer. And of what is your Majesty thinking?" "Why, I was reflecting, my dear," says Jurgen, "that my father imagines things very satisfactorily." End of chapter 37. Chapter 38, Of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice. Chapter 38, As to Applauded Precedents. Afterward, Jurgen abode in hell, and complied with the customs of that country. And the tale tells that a week, or it might be 10 days, after his meeting with Florimel, Jurgen married her, without being at all hindered by his having 3 other wives. For the devils, he found, esteemed polygamy, and ranked it above mere skill at torturing the damned, through a literal interpretation of the saying that it is better to marry than to burn. And formerly, they told Jurgen, you could hardly come across a marriage anywhere that was not hallmarked "Made in Heaven," but since we have been at war with heaven, we have quite taken away that trade from our enemies. So you may marry here as much as you like. Why then, says Jurgen, I shall marry in haste and repeat at leisure. But can one obtain a divorce here? Oh, no, said they. We trafficked in them for a while, but we found that all persons who obtained divorces through our industry promptly thanked heaven they were free at last. In the face of such ingratitude, we gave over that profitless trade, and now there is a manufactory for specialties in men's clothing upon the old statutory grounds. But these makeshifts are unsatisfactory, and I wish to know, in confidence, what do you do in hell when there is no longer putting up with your wives? The devils all blushed. We would prefer not to tell you, said they, for it might get to their ears. Now I do perceive, said Jurgen, that hell is pretty much like any other place. So Jurgen and the lovely vampire were duly married. First Jurgen's nails were trimmed, and the parings were given to Florimel. A broomstick was laid before them, and they stepped over it. Then Florimel said, Temon, thrice, and 9 times did Jurgen reply, Erigizator. Afterward the Emperor Jurgen and his bride were given a posset of dudaim and eruca, and the devils modestly withdrew. Thereafter Jurgen abode in hell, and complied with the customs of that country, and was tolerably content for a while. Now Jurgen shared with Florimel that quiet cleft which she had fitted out in imitation of her girlhood home, and they lived in the suburbs of Barathum very respectably by the shore of the sea. There was, of course, no water in hell. Indeed, the importation of water was forbidden, under severe penalties, in view of its possible use for baptismal purposes. This sea was composed of the blood that had been shed by piety in furthering the kingdom of the Prince of Peace, and was reputed to be the largest ocean in existence. And it explained the nonsensical saying which Jurgen had so often heard as to hell's being paved with good intentions. For Epigenes of Rhodes is right after all, said Jurgen, in suggesting a misprint, and the word should be laved. Why, to be sure, your Majesty, assented Florimel. But I always said your Majesty had remarkable powers of penetration, quite apart from your Majesty's scholarship. For Florimel had this cajoling way of speaking. Nonetheless, all vampires have their foibles, and are nourished by the vigor and youth of their lovers. So one morning Florimel complained of being unwell, and attributed it to indigestion. Jurgen stroked her head meditatively. Then he opened his glittering shirt, and displayed what was plain enough to see. I am full of vigor, and I am young, said Jurgen, but my vigor and my youthfulness are of a peculiar sort, and are not wholesome. So let us have no more of your tricks, or you will quite spoil your vacation by being very ill indeed. But I had thought all emperors were human, said Florimel in a flutter of blushing penitence, exceedingly pretty to observe. Even so, sweetheart, all emperors are not Jurgens, he replied magnificently. Therefore, you will find that not every emperor is justly styled the father of his people, or is qualified by nature to wield the scepter of Numaria. I trust this lesson will suffice. It will, said Florimel with a wry face. So thereafter they had no further trouble of this sort, and the wound on Jurgen's breast was soon healed. And Jurgen kept away from the damned, of course, because he and Florimel were living respectably. They paid a visit to Jurgen's father, however, very shortly after they were married, because this was the proper thing to do. And Koth was civil enough for Koth, and voiced a hope that Florimel might have a good influence upon Jurgen and make him worth his salt, but did not pretend to be optimistic. Yet this visit was never returned, because Koth considered his wickedness was too great for him to be spared a moment of torment, and so would not leave his flame. And really, your Majesty, said Florimel, I do not wish for an instant to have the appearance of criticizing your Majesty's relatives, but I do think that your Majesty's father might have called upon us at least once, particularly after I offered to have a fire made up for him to sit on any time he chose to come. I consider that your Majesty's father assumed somewhat extravagant airs, in the lack of any definite proof as to his having been a bit more wicked than anybody else. And the childlike candor which has always been with me a leading characteristic prevents concealment of my opinion. Oh, it is just his conscience, dear. A conscience is all very well in its place, Your Majesty, and I, for one, would never have been able to endure the interminable labor of seducing and assassinating so many fine young fellows if my conscience had not assured me that it was all the fault of my sister-in-law. But even so, there is no sense in letting your conscience make a slave of you, and when conscience reduces your Majesty's father to ignoring the rules of common civility and behaving like a candlewick, I am sure that matters are being carried too far. And right you are, my dear. However, we do not lack for company. So come now, make yourself fine, and shake the black dog from your back, for we are spending the evening with the Asmodeuses. And will your Majesty talk politics again? Oh, I suppose so. They appear to like it. I only wish that I did, Your Majesty, observed Florimel, and she yawned by anticipation. For with the devils, Jurgen got on garrulously. The religion of hell is patriotism, and the government is an enlightened democracy. This contented the devils, and Jurgen had learned long ago never to fall out with either of these codes, without which, as the devils were fond of observing, hell would not be what it is. They were, to Jurgen's finding, simple-minded fiends who allowed themselves to be deplorably overworked by the importunate dead. They got no rest because of the damned, who were such persons as had been saddled with a conscience, and who in consequence demanded interminable torments. And at the time of Jurgen's coming into hell, political affairs were in a very bad way, because there was a considerable party among the younger devils who were for compounding the age-old war with heaven at almost any price, in order to get relief from this unceasing influx of conscientious dead persons in search of torment. For it was well known that when Satan submitted to be bound in chains, there would be no more death, and the annoying immigration would thus be ended. So said the younger devils, and considered Grandfather Satan ought to sacrifice himself for the general welfare. Then, too, they pointed out that Satan had been perforce their presiding magistrate ever since the settlement of hell, because a change of administration is inexpedient in wartime, so that Satan must term after term be re-elected. And, of course, Satan had been voted absolute power in everything, since this too is customary in wartime. Well, and after the first few thousand years of this, the younger devils began to whisper that such government was not ideal democracy. But their more conservative elders were enraged by these effete and wild new notions, and dealt with their juniors somewhat severely, tearing them into bits and quite destroying them. The elder devils then proceeded to inflict even more startling punishments. So Grandfather Satan was much vexed, because the laws were being violated everywhere, and a day or two after Jurgen's advent, Satan issued a public appeal to his subjects that the code of hell should be better respected. But under a democratic government, people do not like to be perpetually bothering about law and order, as one of the older and stronger devils pointed out to Jurgen. Jurgen drew a serious face, and he stroked his chin. "Why, but look you," says Jurgen, "in deploring the mob spirit that has been manifesting itself sporadically throughout this country against the advocates of peace and submission to the commands of heaven and other pro-celestial propaganda, and in warning loyal citizens that such outbursts must be guarded against as hurtful to the public welfare of hell, why, Grandfather Satan should bear in mind that the government, in large measure, holds the remedy of the evil in its own hands." And Jurgen looked severely towards Satan. "Come now," says Phlegethon, nodding his head, which was like that of a bear, except for his naked, long red ears, inside each of which was a flame like that of a spirit lamp. "Come now, but this young emperor in the fine shirt speaks uncommonly well." "So we spoke together in Pandemonium," said Belial wistfully, "in the brave days when Pandemonium was newly built and we were all imps together." "Yes, this talk is of the old school, than which there is none better. So pray continue, Emperor Jurgen," cried the elderly devils, "and let us know what you are talking about." "Why, merely this," says Jurgen, and again he looks severely toward Satan. "I tell you that as long as sentimental weakness marks the prosecution of offenses in violation of the laws necessitated by wartime conditions, as long as deserved punishment for overt acts of pro-celestialism is withheld, as long as weak-kneed clemency condones even a suspicion of disloyal thinking, then just so long will a righteously incensed, if now and then misguided patriotism take into its own hands vengeance upon the offenders." "But still," said Grandfather Satan. "Ineffectual administration of the law," continued Jurgen sternly, "is the true defense of these outbursts, and far more justly deplorable than acts of mob violence is the policy of condonation that furnishes occasion for them. The patriotic people of hell are not in a temper to be trifled with, now that they are at war. Conviction for offenses against the nation should not be behedged about with technicalities devised for over-refined peacetime jurisprudence. Why, there is no one of you, I am sure, but has at his tongue's tip the immortal words of Livonius as to this very topic, and so I shall not repeat them. But I fancy you will agree with me that what Livonius says is unanswerable." So it was that Jurgen went on at a great rate, and looking always very sternly at Grandfather Satan. "Yes, yes," said Satan, wriggling uncomfortably, but still not thinking of Jurgen entirely. "Yes, all this is excellent oratory, and not for a moment would I decry the authority of Livonius. And your quotation is uncommonly apropos and all that sort of thing. But with what are you charging me?" "With sentimental weakness," retorted Jurgen. "Was it not only yesterday one of the younger devils was brought before you upon the charge that he had said the climate in heaven was better than the climate here? And you, sir, hell's chief magistrate, you it was who actually asked him if he had ever uttered such a disloyal heresy." "Now, but what else was I to do?" said Satan, fidgeting and swishing his great bushy tail so that it rustled against his horns, and still not really turning his mind from that ancient thought. "You should have remembered, sir, that a devil whose patriotism is impugned is a devil to be punished, and that there is no time to be prying into irrelevant questions of his guilt or innocence. Otherwise, I take it, you will never have any real democracy in hell." Now Jurgen looked very impressive, and the devils were all cheering him. "And so," says Jurgen, "your disgusted hearers were wearied by such frivolous interrogatories, and took the fellow out of your hands, and tore him into particularly small bits. Now I warn you, Grandfather Satan, that it is your duty as a democratic magistrate just so to deal with such offenders first of all, and to ask your silly questions afterward. For what does Rudagernus say outright upon this point, and Xantifer Magnus too? Why, my dear sir, I ask you plainly, where in the entire history of international jurisprudence will you find any more explicit language than these two employ?" "Now, certainly," says Satan with his bleak smile, "you cite very respectable authority, and I shall take your reproof in good part. I will endeavor to be more strict in the future. And you must not blame my laxity too severely, Emperor Jurgen, for it is a long while since any man came living into hell to instruct us how to manage matters in time of war. No doubt, precisely as you say, we do need a little more severity hereabouts, and would gain by adopting more human methods. Rudagernus now? Yes, Rudagernus is rather unanswerable, and I concede it frankly. So do you come home and have supper with me, Emperor Jurgen, and we will talk over these things." Then Jurgen went off arm in arm with Grandfather Satan, and Jurgen's erudition and sturdy common sense were forevermore established among the older and more solid element in hell. And Satan followed Jurgen's suggestions, and the threatened rebellion was satisfactorily discouraged by tearing into very small fragments anybody who grumbled about anything, so that all the subjects of Satan went about smiling broadly all the time at the thought of what might befall them if they seemed dejected. Thus was hell a happier-looking place because of Jurgen's coming. End of Chapter 38. Chapter 39, of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 39, Of Compromises in Hell. Now, Grandfather Satan's wife was called Phyllis, and apart from having wings like a bat's, she was the loveliest little slip of devilishness that Jurgen had seen in a long while. Jurgen spent this night at the Black House of Baratham, and 2 more nights, or it might be 3 nights, and the details of what Jurgen used to do there after supper, when he would walk alone in the Black House gardens among the artfully colored cast-iron flowers and shrubbery, and would so come to the grated windows of Phyllis's room, and would stand there joking with her in the dark, are not requisite to this story. Satan was very jealous of his wife, and kept one of her wings clipped and held her under lock and key, as the treasure that she was. But Jurgen was accustomed to say afterward that, while the gratings over the windows were very formidable, they only seemed somehow to enhance the piquancy of his commerce with Dame Phyllis. This queen, said Jurgen, he had found simply unexcelled at repartee. Florimel considered the saying cryptic. Just what precisely did His Majesty mean? Why, that in any and all circumstances Dame Phyllis knows how to take a joke, and to return as good as she receives. So your Majesty has already informed me, and certainly jokes can be exchanged through a grating. Yes, that is what I meant, and Dame Phyllis appeared to appreciate my ready flow of humor. She informs me Grandfather Satan is of a cold, dry temperament, with very little humor in him, so that they go for months without exchanging any pleasantries. Well, I am willing to taste any drink once. And for the rest, remembering that my host had very enormous and intimidating horns, I was at particular pains to deal fairly with my hostess, though, indeed, it was more for the honor and the glory of the affair than anything else that I exchanged pleasantries with Satan's wife. For to do that, my dear, I felt was worthy of the Emperor Jurgen. "Ah, I am afraid your Majesty is a sad scapegrace," replied Florimel. "However, we all know that the scepter of an emperor is respected everywhere." "Indeed," said Jurgen. "I have often regretted that I did not bring with me my jeweled scepter when I left Numeria." She shivered at some unspoken thought. It was not until some while afterward that Florimel told Jurgen of her humiliating misadventure with the absent-minded Sultan of Garsao's scepter. Now she only replied that jewels might, conceivably, seem ostentatious and out of place. Jurgen agreed to this truism, for of course they were living very quietly, and Jurgen was splendid enough for any reasonable wife's requirements in his glittering shirt. So Jurgen got on pleasantly with Florimel, but he never became as fond of her as he had been of Guinevere or Anaitis, nor 1/10 as fond of her as he had been of Chloris. In the first place, he suspected that Florimel had been invented by his father, and Koth and Jurgen had never any tastes in common. And in the second place, Jurgen could not but see that Florimel thought a great deal of his being an emperor. "It is my title she loves, not me," reflected Jurgen sadly, "and her affection is less for that which is really integral to me than for imperial orbs and scepters and such-like external trappings." And Jurgen would come out of Florimel's cleft considerably dejected, and would sit alone by the sea of blood, and would meditate how inequitable it was that the mere title of emperor should thus shut him off from sincerity and candor. "We who are called kings and emperors are men like other men. We are as rightly entitled as other persons to be the solace of true love and affection. Instead, we live in a continuous isolation, and women offer us all things save their hearts, and we are a lonely folk. No, I cannot believe that Florimel loves me for myself alone. It is my title which dazzles her, and I would that I had never made myself the Emperor of Numaria. For this emperor goes about everywhere in a fabulous splendor, and is, very naturally, resistless in his semi-mythical magnificence. Ah, but these imperial gewgaws distract the thoughts of Florimel from the real Jurgen, so that the real Jurgen is a person whom she does not understand at all, and it is not fair." Then, too, he had a sort of prejudice against the way in which Florimel spent her time in seducing and murdering young men. It was not possible, of course, actually to blame the girl, since she was the victim of circumstances, and had no choice about becoming a vampire, once the cat had jumped over her coffin. Still, Jurgen always felt, in his illogical masculine way, that her vocation was not nice. And equally in the illogical way of men did he persist in coaxing Florimel to tell him of her vampiric transactions, in spite of his underlying feeling that he would prefer to have his wife engaged in some other trade. And the merry little creature would humor him willingly enough, with her purple eyes a-sparkle and with her vivid lips curling prettily back so as to show her tiny white sharp teeth quite plainly. She was really very pretty thus, as she told him of what happened in Copenhagen, when young Count Osmond went down into the blind beggar-woman's cellar, and what they did with bits of him, and how one kind of serpent came to have a secret name, when cried aloud in the night, with the appropriate ceremony, will bring about delicious happenings, and of what one can do with small unchristened children, if only they do not kiss you with their moist, uncertain little mouths, for then this thing is impossible. And of what use she had made of young Sir Ganelon's skull, when he was through with it, and she with him. And of what the young priest Wulfnorth had said to the crocodiles at the very last. "Oh yes, my life has its amusing side," said Florimel, "and one likes to feel, of course, that one is not wholly out of touch with things, and is even, in one's modest way, contributing to the suppression of folly. But even so, your Majesty, the calls that are made upon one, the things that young men expect of you as the price of their bodily and spiritual ruin, and the things their relatives say about you, and above all, the constant strain, the irregular hours, and the continual effort to live up to one's position. Oh yes, your Majesty, I was far happier when I was a consumptive seamstress and took pride in my buttonholes. But from a sister-in-law who only has you in to tea occasionally as a matter of duty, and who is prominent in church work, one may, of course, expect anything. And that reminds me that I really must tell your Majesty about what happened in the hayloft, just after the abbot had finished undressing." So she would chatter away, while Jurgen listened and smiled indulgently, for she certainly was very pretty. And so they kept house in hell contentedly enough until Florimel's vacation was at an end, and then they parted without any tears, but in perfect friendliness. And Jurgen always remembered Florimel most pleasantly, but not as a wife with whom he had ever been on terms of actual intimacy. Now when this lovely vampire had quitted him, the Emperor Jurgen, in spite of his general popularity and the deference accorded his political views, was not quite happy in hell. "It is a comfort, at any rate," said Jurgen, "to discover who originated the theory of democratic government. I have long wondered who started the notion that the way to get a wise decision on any conceivable question was to submit it to a popular vote. Now I know. Well, and the devils may be right in their doctrines. Certainly, I cannot go so far as to say they are wrong, but still, at the same time. For instance, this interminable effort to make the universe safe for democracy, this continual warring against heaven because heaven clung to a tyrannical form of autocratic government, sounded both logical and magnanimous, and was, of course, the only method of ensuring any general triumph for democracy. Yet it seemed rather futile to Jurgen, since, as he knew now, there was certainly something in the celestial system which made for military efficiency, so that heaven usually won. Moreover, Jurgen could not get over the fact that hell was just a notion of his ancestors, with which Koschei had happened to fall in. For Jurgen had never much patience with antiquated ideas, particularly when anyone put them into practice, as Koschei had done. "Why, this place appears to me a glaring anachronism," said Jurgen, brooding over the fires of Chorasma. "And its methods of tormenting conscientious people I cannot but consider very crude indeed. The devils are simple-minded, and they mean well, as nobody would dream of denying, but that is just it. For hereabouts is needed some more pertinacious and efficiently disagreeable person." And that, of course, reminded him of Dame Lisa, and so it was the thoughts of Jurgen turned again to doing the manly thing, and he sighed and went among the devils tentatively looking and inquiring for that intrepid fiend who in the form of a black gentleman had carried off Dame Lisa. But a queer happening befell, and it was that nowhere could Jurgen find the black gentleman, nor did any of the devils know anything about him. "From what you tell us, Emperor Jurgen," said they all, "your wife was an acidulous shrew, and the sort of woman who believes that whatever she does is right." "It was not a belief," says Jurgen. "It was a mania with the poor dear." "By that fact, then, she is forever debarred from entering hell." "You tell me news," says Jurgen, "which, if generally known, would lead many husbands into vicious living." "But it is notorious that people are saved by faith, and there is no faith stronger than that of a bad-tempered woman in her own infallibility. Plainly, this wife of yours is the sort of person who cannot be tolerated by anybody short of the angels. We deduce that your empress must be in heaven." "Well, that sounds reasonable, and so to heaven I will go, and it may be that there I shall find justice." "We would have you know," the fiends cried, bristling, "that in hell we have all kinds of justice, since our government is an enlightened democracy." "Just so," says Jurgen. "In an enlightened democracy one has all kinds of justice, and I would not dream of denying it. But you have not, you conceive, that lesser plague, my wife, and it is she whom I must continue to look for." "Oh, as you like," said they, "so long as you do not criticize the exigencies of wartime. But certainly we are sorry to see you going into a country where the benighted people put up with an autocrat who was not duly elected to his position. And why need you continue seeking your wife's society when it is so much pleasanter living in hell?" And Jurgen shrugged. "One has to do the manly thing sometimes." So the fiends told him the way to heaven's frontiers, pitying him. "But the crossing of the frontier must be your affair." "I have a cantrap," said Jurgen, "and my stay in hell has taught me how to use it." Then Jurgen followed his instructions, and went into Meridi and turned to the left when he had come to the great puddle where the adders and toads are reared, and so passed through the mists of Tartarus with due care of the wild lightning, and took the second turn to his left. "Always in seeking heaven be guided by your heart," had been the advice given him by the devils, and thus avoiding the abode of Gemra, he crossed the bridge over the bottomless pit and the solitary Naricus. And Brachus, who kept the toll-gate on this bridge, did that of which the fiends had forewarned Jurgen, but for this, of course, there was no help. End of chapter 39. Chapter 40 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice. Chapter 40 The Ascension of Pope Jurgen. The tale tells how on the Feast of the Annunciation Jurgen came to the high white walls which girdle heaven. For Jurgen's forefathers had, of course, imagined that hell stood directly contiguous to heaven, so that the blessed could augment their felicity by gazing down upon the torments of the damned. Now at this time a boy angel was looking over the parapet of heaven's wall. "And a good day to you, my fine young fellow," says Jurgen. "But of what are you thinking so intently?" For just as Dives had done long years before, now Jurgen found that a man's voice carries perfectly between hell and heaven. "Sir," replies the boy, "I was pitying the poor damned." "Why, then, you must be Oregon," says Jurgen, laughing. "No, sir, my name is Jurgen." "Heyday," says Jurgen. "Well, but this Jurgen has been a great many persons in my time, so very possibly you speak the truth." "I am Jurgen, the son of Koth and Azra." But so were all of them, my boy." "Why, then, I am Jurgen, the grandson of Steinvor, and the grandchild whom she loved above her other grandchildren, and so I abide forever in heaven with all the other illusions of Steinvor. But who, monsieur, are you that go about hell unscorched, in such a fine-looking shirt?" Jurgen reflected. Clearly, it would never do to give his real name, and thus raise the question as to whether Jurgen was in heaven or hell. Then he recollected the cantrap of the master philologist, which Jurgen had twice employed incorrectly. And Jurgen cleared his throat, for he believed that he now understood the proper use of cantraps. "Perhaps," says Jurgen, "I ought to tell you who I am. But what is life without confidence in one another? Besides, you appear to be a boy of remarkable discretion." So I will confide in you that I am Pope John the 20th, heaven's regent upon earth, now visiting this place upon celestial business, which I am not at liberty to divulge more particularly, for reasons that will at once occur to a young man of your unusual cleverness." "Oh, but I say, this is droll. Do you just wait a moment," cried the boy angel. His bright face vanished with a whisking of brown curls, and Jurgen carefully reread the cantrap of the master philologist. "Yes, I have found, I think, the way to use such magic," observes Jurgen. Presently the young angel reappeared at the parapet. "I say, monsieur, I looked on the register. All the popes are admitted here the moment they die, without inquiring into their private affairs, you know, so as to avoid any unfortunate scandal. And we have 23 Pope Johns listed. And sure enough, the mansion prepared for John the 20th is vacant. He seems to be the only pope that is not in heaven." "Why, but of course not," says Jurgen complacently, "inasmuch as you see me, who was once Bishop of Rome and servant to the servants of God, standing down here on this cinder heap." "Yes, but none of the others in your series appears to place you. John the 19th says he never heard of you, and not to bother him in the middle of a harp lesson." "He died before my ascension, naturally." "And John the 21st says he thinks they lost count somehow, and that there never was any Pope John the 20th. He says you must be an impostor." "Ah, professional jealousy," sighed Jurgen. "Dear me, this is very sad, and gives one a poor opinion of human nature. Now, my boy, I put it to you fairly. How could there have been a 21st unless there had been a 20th? And what becomes of the great principle of papal infallibility when a pope admits to a mistake in elementary arithmetic? Oh, but this is a very dangerous heresy, let me tell you. An inquisition matter, a consistory business. Yet, luckily, upon his own contention, this Pedro Giuliani— and that was his name, too, for he told me. You evidently know all about it, monsieur," said the young man, visibly impressed. "Of course I know all about it. Well, I repeat, upon his own contention this man is non-existent, and so whatever he may say amounts to nothing. For he tells you there was never any Pope John the 20th, and either he is lying or he is telling you the truth. If he is lying, you, of course, ought not to believe him. Yet if he is telling you the truth about there never having been any Pope John the 20th, why then, quite plainly, there was never any Pope John the 21st, so that this man asserts his own non-existence, and thus is talking nonsense, and you, of course, ought not to believe in nonsense. Even did we grant his insane contention that he is nobody, you are too well brought up, I am sure, to dispute that nobody tells lies in heaven. It follows that, in this case, nobody is lying, and so, of course, I must be telling the truth, and you have no choice save to believe me." "Now, certainly that sounds all right," the younger Jurgen conceded, "though you explain it so quickly it is a little difficult to follow you." "Ah, but furthermore, and over and above this, and as a tangible proof of the infallible particularity of every syllable of my assertion," observed the elder Jurgen, "if you will look in the garret of heaven, you will find the identical ladder upon which I descended hither, and which I directed them to lay aside until I was ready to come up again. Indeed, I was just about to ask you to fetch it, inasmuch as my business here is satisfactorily concluded." Well, the boy agreed that the word of no pope, whether in hell or heaven, was tangible proof like a ladder, and again he was off. Jurgen waited in tolerable confidence. It was a matter of logic. Jacob's ladder must, from all accounts, have been far too valuable to throw away after one night's use at Bethel. It would come in very handy on Judgment Day, and Jurgen's knowledge of Lisa enabled him to deduce that anything which was being kept because it would come in handy some day would inevitably be stored in the garret, in any establishment imaginable by women. And it is notorious that heaven is a delusion of old women. Why, the thing is a certainty, said Jurgen, simply a mathematical certainty. And events proved his logic correct, for presently the younger Jurgen came back with Jacob's ladder, which was rather cobwebby and obsolete-looking after having been laid aside so long. "So you see you were perfectly right," then said his younger Jurgen as he lowered Jacob's ladder into hell. "Oh, Monsieur John, do hurry up and have it out with that old fellow who slandered you." Thus it came about that Jurgen clambered merrily from hell to heaven upon a ladder of unalloyed, time-tested gold. And as he climbed, the shirt of Nessus glittered handsomely in the light which shone from heaven. And by this great light above him, as Jurgen mounted higher and yet higher, the shadow of Jurgen was lengthened beyond belief along the sheer white wall of heaven, as though the shadow were reluctant and adhered tenaciously to hell. Yet presently Jurgen leapt the ramparts, and then the shadow leapt too, and so his shadow came with Jurgen into heaven, and huddled dispiritedly at Jurgen's feet. "Well, well," thinks Jurgen, "certainly there is no disputing the magic of the master philologist when it is correctly employed, for through its aid I am entering alive into heaven, as only Enoch and Elijah have done before me. And moreover, if this boy is to be believed, one of the very handsomest of heaven's many mansions awaits my occupancy. One could not ask more of any magician fairly. Aha, if only Lisa could see me now." That was his first thought. Afterward, Jurgen tore up the cantrap and scattered its fragments as the master philologist had directed. Then Jurgen turned to the boy who aided Jurgen to get into heaven. "Come, youngster, and let us have a good look at you." And Jurgen talked with the boy that he had once been, and stood face to face with all that Jurgen had been and was not any longer. And this was the one happening which befell Jurgen that the writer of the tale lacked heart to tell of. So Jurgen quitted the boy that he had been. But first had Jurgen learned that in this place his grandmother Steinvor, whom King Smoit had loved, abode and was happy in her notion of heaven, and that about her were her notions of her children and of her grandchildren. Steinvor had never imagined her husband in heaven, nor King Smoit either. "That is a circumstance," says Jurgen, "which heartens me to hope one may find justice here. Yet I shall keep away from my grandmother, the Steinvor whom I knew and loved, and who loved me so blindly that this boy here is her notion of me. Yes, in mere fairness to her, I must keep away." So he avoided that part of heaven wherein were his grandmother's illusions. And this was counted for righteousness in Jurgen. That part of heaven smelt of mignonette, and a starling was singing there. End of chapter 40. Chapter 41, of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 41, of Compromises in Heaven. Jurgen then went unhindered to where God of Jurgen's grandmother sat upon a throne beside a sea of crystal. A rainbow, made high and narrow like a window frame so as to fit the throne, formed an archway in which he sat. At his feet burned 7 lamps, and 4 remarkable winged creatures sat there chanting softly, "Glory and honor and thanks to him who liveth forever." In one hand of the god was a scepter, and in the other a large book with 7 red spots on it. There were 12 smaller thrones, without rainbows, upon each side of the god of Jurgen's grandmother, in 2 semicircles. Upon these inferior thrones sat benignant-looking elderly angels, with long white hair, all crowned and clothed in white robes, and having a harp in one hand, and in the other a gold flask about pint-size. And everywhere fluttered and glittered the multicolored wings of seraphs and cherubs, like magnified parakeets, as they went softly and gaily about the golden haze that brooded over heaven, to a continuous sound of hushed organ music and a remote and undistinguishable singing. Now the eyes of this god met the eyes of Jurgen, and Jurgen waited thus for a long while, and far longer indeed than Jurgen suspected. "I fear you," Jurgen said at last, "and yes, I love you, and yet I cannot believe. Why could you not let me believe, where so many believed? Or else, why could you not let me deride, as the remainder derided so noisily? O God, why could you not let me have faith? For you gave me no faith in anything, not even in nothingness. It was not fair. And in the highest court of heaven, and in plain view of all the angels, Jurgen began to weep. I was not ever your God, Jurgen. Once very long ago, said Jurgen, I had faith in you. No, for that boy is here with me, as you yourself have seen. And today there is nothing remaining of him anywhere in the man that is Jurgen. God of my grandmother, God whom I too loved in boyhood, said Jurgen then, why is it that I am denied a God? For I have searched, and nowhere can I find justice, and nowhere can I find anything to worship. What, Jurgen, and would you look for justice of all places in heaven? No, Jurgen said, no, I perceive it cannot be considered here, else you would sit alone. And for the rest, you have looked to find your God without, not looking within to see that which is truly worshipped in the thoughts of Jurgen. Had you done so, you would have seen, as plainly as I now see, that which you alone are able to worship. And your God is maimed, the dust of your journeying is thick upon him, your vanity is laid as a napkin upon his eyes, and in his heart is neither love nor hate, not even for his only worshipper. Do not deride him, you who have so many worshippers. At least he is a monstrous clever fellow, said Jurgen, and boldly he said it, in the highest court of heaven, and before the pensive face of the God of Jurgen's grandmother. Ah, very probably. I do not meet with many clever people. And as for my numerous worshippers, you forget how often you have demonstrated that I was the delusion of an old woman. Well, and was there ever a flaw in my logic? I was not listening to you, Jurgen. You must know that logic does not much concern us, inasmuch as nothing is logical hereabouts. And now the four-winged creatures ceased their chanting, and the organ music became a far-off murmuring, and there was a silence in heaven. And the God of Jurgen's grandmother, too, was silent for a while, and the rainbow under which he sat put off its 7 colors and burned with an unendurable white, tinged bluishly, while the god considered ancient things. Then, in the silence, this god began to speak. Some years ago, said the god of Jurgen's grandmother, it was reported to Koschei that skepticism was abroad in his universe, and that one walked therein who would be contented with no rational explanation. Bring me this infidel, says Koschei. So they brought to him in the void a little bent grey woman in an old grey shawl. Now tell me why you will not believe, says Koschei, in things as they are. Then the decent little bent grey woman answered civilly, I do not know, sir, who you happen to be. But since you ask me, everybody knows that things as they are must be regarded as temporary afflictions, and as trials through which we are righteously condemned to pass, in order to attain to eternal life with our loved ones in heaven. Ah, yes, said Koschei, who made things as they are. Ah, yes, to be sure. And how did you learn of this? Why, every Sunday morning the priest discoursed to us about heaven, and of how happy we would be there after death. Has this woman died, then? Asked Koschei. Yes, sir, they told him, recently, and she will believe nothing we explain to her, but demands to be taken to heaven. Now, this is very vexing, Koschei said, and I cannot, of course, put up with such skepticism. That would never do. So why do you not convey her to this heaven which she believes in, and thus put an end to the matter? But, sir, they told him, there is no such place. Then Koschei reflected. It is certainly strange that a place which does not exist should be a matter of public knowledge in another place. Where does this woman come from? From Earth, they told him. Where is that? He asked, and they explained to him as well as they could. Oh, yes, over that way, Koshchei interrupted. "I remember. Now, but what is your name, woman who wishes to go to heaven?" "Steinvor, sir, and if you please, I am rather in a hurry to be with my children again. You see, I have not seen any of them for a long while." "But stay," said Koshchei. "What is that which comes into this woman's eyes as she speaks of her children?" They told him it was love. "Did I create this love?" says Koshchei, who made things as they are. And they told him no, and that there were many sorts of love, but that this especial sort was an illusion which women had invented for themselves, and which they exhibited in all dealings with their children. And Koshchei sighed. "Tell me about your children," Koshchei then said to Steinvor, "and look at me as you talk, so that I may see your eyes." So Steinvor talked of her children, and Koshchei, who made all things, listened very attentively. Of Koth she told him, of her only son, confessing Koth was the finest boy that ever lived. A little wild, sir, at first, but then you know what boys are. And telling of how well Koth had done in business, and of how he had even risen to be an alderman. Koshchei, who made all things, seemed properly impressed. Then Steinvor talked of her daughters, of Imperia and Lindamira and Christine, of Imperia's beauty, and of Lindamira's bravery under the mishaps of an unlucky marriage, and of Christine's superlative housekeeping. Fine women, sir, every one of them, with children of their own, and to me they still seem such babies, bless them. And the decent little bent grey woman laughed. "I have been very lucky in my children, sir, and in my grandchildren too," she told Koshchei. "There is Jurgen now, my Koth's boy. You may not believe it, sir, but there is a story I must tell you about Jurgen." And so she ran on very happily and proudly, while Koshchei, who made all things, listened, and watched the eyes of Steinvor. Then privately Koshchei asked, "Are these children and grandchildren of Steinvor such as she reports?" "No, sir," they told him privately. So as Steinvor talked, Koshchei devised illusions in accordance with that which Steinvor said, and created such children and grandchildren as she described. Male and female he created them standing behind Steinvor, and all were beautiful and stainless, and Koshchei gave life to these illusions. Then Koshchei bade her turn about. She obeyed, and Koshchei was forgotten. Well, Koshchei sat there alone in the void, looking not very happy, and looking puzzled, and drumming upon his knee, and staring at the little bent grey woman who was busied with her children and grandchildren, and had forgotten all about him. "But surely, Lindamira," he hears Steinvor say, "we are not yet in heaven." "Ah, my dear mother," replies her illusion of Lindamira, "to be with you again is heaven, and besides, it may be that heaven is like this after all. My darling child, it is sweet of you to say that, and exactly like you to say that, but you know very well that heaven is fully described in the book of Revelations, in the Bible, as the glorious place that heaven is. Whereas, as you can see for yourself, around us is nothing at all, and no person at all, except that very civil gentleman to whom I was just talking, and who, between ourselves, seems woefully uninformed about the most ordinary matters." "Bring earth to me," says Koshchei. This was done, and Koshchei looked over the planet and found a Bible. Koshchei opened the Bible and read the Revelation of St. John the Divine, while Steinvor talked with her illusions. "I see," said Koshchei. "The idea is a little garish. Still—" So he replaced the Bible and bade them put earth, too, in its proper place, for Koshchei dislikes wasting anything. Then Koshchei smiled and created heaven about Steinvor and her illusions, and he made heaven just such a place as was described in the book. And so, Jurgen, that is how it came about," ended the god of Jurgen's grandmother. "And me also Koshchei created at that time, with the seraphim and the saints and all the blessed, very much as you see us. And, of course, he caused us to have been here always, since the beginning of time, because that too was in the book." "But how could that be done?" says Jurgen, with brows puckering. "And in what way could Koshchei juggle so with time?" "How should I know, since I am but the illusion of an old woman, as you have so frequently proved by logic? Let it suffice that whatever Koshchei wills not only happens, but has already happened beyond the ancientest memory of man and his mother. How otherwise could he be Koshchei?" "And all this," said Jurgen virtuously, "for a woman who was not even faithful to her husband." "Oh, very probably," said the god. "At all events, it was done for a woman who loved. Koshchei will do almost anything to humor love, since love is one of the two things which are impossible to Koshchei." "I have heard that pride is impossible to Koshchei." The god of Jurgen's grandmother raised his white eyebrows. "What is pride? I do not think I ever heard of it before. Assuredly, it is something that does not enter here." "But why is love impossible to Koshchei?" "Because Koshchei made things as they are, and day and night he contemplates things as they are. How, then, can Koshchei love anything?" But Jurgen shook his sleek black head. "That I cannot understand at all. If I were imprisoned in a cell wherein was nothing except my verses, I would not be happy, and certainly I would not be proud. But even so, I would love my verses. I am afraid that I fall more readily with the ideas of Grandmother Satan than with yours, and without contradicting you, I cannot but wonder if what you reveal is true." "And how should I know whether or not I speak the truth?" the god asked of him, "since I am but the illusion of an old woman, as you have so frequently proved by logic." "Well, well," said Jurgen, "you may be right in all matters, and certainly I cannot presume to say you are wrong. But still, at the same time— No, even now I do not quite believe in you." "Who could expect it of a clever fellow who sees so clearly through the illusions of an old woman?" the god asked a little wearily. And Jurgen answered, "God of my grandmother, I cannot quite believe in you, and your doings as they are recorded I find incoherent and a little droll. But I am glad the affair has been so arranged that you may always now be real to brave and gentle persons who have believed in and have worshipped and have loved you. To have disappointed them would have been unfair, and it is right that before the faith they had in you not even Koshchei, who made things as they are, was able to be reasonable. God of my grandmother, I cannot quite believe in you, but remembering the sum of love and faith that has been given you, I tremble. I think of the dear people whose living was confident and glad because of their faith in you. I think of them, and in my heart contends a blind contrition, and a yearning, and an enviousness, and yet a tender sort of amusement colors all. O God, there was never any other deity who had such dear worshippers as you have had, and you should be very proud of them. God of my grandmother, I cannot quite believe in you. Yet I am not as those who would come peering at you reasonably. I, Jurgen, see you only through a mist of tears. For you were loved by those whom I loved greatly very long ago, and when I look at you, it is your worshippers and the dear believers of old that I remember. And it seems to me that dates and manuscripts and the opinions of learned persons are very trifling things beside what I remember, and what I envy. Who could have expected such a monstrous clever fellow ever to envy the illusions of old women?" the god of Jurgen's grandmother asked again, and yet his countenance was not unfriendly. "Why, but," said Jurgen on a sudden, "why, but my grandmother, in a way, was right about heaven and about you also. For certainly you seem to exist, and to reign in just such a state as she described. And yet, according to your latest revelation, I too was right, in a way, about these things being an old woman's delusions. I wonder now—" "Yes, Jurgen?" "Why, I wonder if everything is right in a way. I wonder if that is the large secret of everything. It would not be a bad solution, sir, said Jurgen meditatively. The god smiled. Then suddenly that part of heaven was vacant, except for Jurgen, who stood there quite alone. And before him was the throne of the vanished god and the scepter of the god, and Jurgen saw that the 7 spots upon the great book were of red sealing wax. Jurgen was afraid, but he was particularly appalled by his consciousness that he was not going to falter. "What, you who have been duke and prince and king and emperor and pope, and do such dignities content a Jurgen? Why, not at all," says Jurgen. So Jurgen ascended the throne of heaven, and sat beneath that wondrous rainbow, and in his lap now was the book, and in his hand was the scepter of the god of Jurgen's grandmother. Jurgen sat thus for a long while regarding the bright vacant courts of heaven. "And what will you do now?" says Jurgen aloud. "O fretful little Jurgen, you that have complained because you had not your desire, you are omnipotent over earth and all the affairs of men. What now is your desire?" And sitting thus terribly enthroned, the heart of Jurgen was lead within him, and he felt old and very tired. "For I do not know. Oh, nothing can help me, for I do not know what thing it is that I desire. And this book and this scepter and this throne avail me nothing at all, and nothing can ever avail me, for I am Jurgen who seeks he knows not what." So Jurgen shrugged and climbed down from the throne of God, and, wandering at adventure, came presently to 4 archangels. They were seated upon a fleecy cloud, and they were eating milk and honey from gold porringers. And of these radiant beings Jurgen inquired the quickest way out of heaven. "For hereabouts are none of my illusions," said Jurgen, "and I must now return to such illusions as are congenial. One must believe in something, and all that I have seen in heaven I have admired and envied, but in none of these things could I believe, and with none of these things could I be satisfied. And while I think of it, I wonder now if any of you gentlemen can give me news of that Lisa who used to be my wife." He described her, and they regarded him with compassion. But these archangels, he found, had never heard of Lisa, and they assured him there was no such person in heaven. For Steinvor had died when Jurgen was a boy, and so she had never seen Lisa, and in consequence had not thought about Lisa one way or the other when Steinvor outlined her notions to Koshchei, who made things as they are. Now Jurgen discovered too that, when his eyes first met the eyes of the god of Jurgen's grandmother, Jurgen had stayed motionless for 37 days, forgetful of everything save that the god of his grandmother was love. "Nobody else has willingly turned away so soon," Zachariah told him. "And we think that your insensibility is due to some evil virtue in the glittering garment which you are wearing, and of which the like was never seen in heaven." "I did but search for justice," Jurgen said, "and I could not find it in the eyes of your God, but only love and such forgiveness as troubled me." "Because of that you should rejoice," the 4 archangels said. "And so should all that lives rejoice, and more particularly should we rejoice that dwell in heaven, and hourly praise our Lord God's negligence of justice, whereby we are permitted to enter into this place." End of chapter 41. Chapter 42, of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 42, 12 that are fretted hourly. So it was upon Walburga's Eve, when almost anything is rather more than likely to happen, that Jurgen went hastily out of heaven, without having gained or wasted any love there. St. Peter unbarred for him, not the main entrance, but a small private door, carved with innumerable fishes in bas-relief, because this exit opened directly upon any place you chose to imagine. "For thus," St. Peter said, "you may return without loss of time to your own illusions." "There was a cross," said Jurgen, "which I used to wear about my neck, through motives of sentiment, because it once belonged to my dead mother. for no woman has ever loved me save that Azra who was my mother." "I wonder if your mother told you that?" St. Peter asked him, smiling reminiscently. "Mine did, time and again, and sometimes I have wondered. For, as you may remember, I was a married man, Jurgen, and my wife did not quite understand me," said St. Peter with a sigh. "Why, indeed," says Jurgen, "my case is not entirely dissimilar, and the more I marry, the less I find of comprehension. I should have had more sympathy with King Smoit, who was certainly my grandfather. Well, you conceive, St. Peter, these other women have trusted me, more or less, because they loved a phantom, Jurgen. But Azra trusted me not at all, because she loved me with clear eyes. She comprehended Jurgen, and yet loved him, though I, for one, with all my cleverness, cannot do either of these things. Nonetheless, in order to do the manly thing, in order to pleasure a woman, and a married woman too, I flung away the little gold cross which was all that remained to me of my mother. And since then, St. Peter, the illusions of sentiment have given me a woefully wide berth. So I shall relinquish heaven to seek a cross." "That has been done before, Jurgen, and I doubt if much good came of it." "Heyday, and did it not lead to the eternal glory of the first and greatest of the popes? It seems to me, sir, that you have either very little memory or very little gratitude, and I am tempted to crow in your face." "Why, now you talk like a cherub, Jurgen, and you ought to have better manners. Do you suppose that we apostles enjoy hearing jokes made about the Church?" "Well, it is true, St. Peter, that you founded the Church." "Now there you go again. That is what those patronizing seraphim and those impish cherubs are always telling us. You see, we 12 sit together in heaven, each on his white throne, and we behold everything that happens on earth. Now, from our station, there has been no ignoring the growth and doings of what you might loosely call Christianity, and sometimes that which we see makes us very uncomfortable, Jurgen, especially as just then some cherub is sure to flutter by, in a broad grin, and chuckle, 'But you started it!' And we did. I cannot deny that in a way we did. Yet really we never anticipated anything of this sort, and it is not fair to tease us about it. Indeed, St. Peter, now I think of it, you ought to be held responsible for very little that has been said or done in the shadow of a steeple. For, as I remember it, you 12 attempted to convert a world to the teachings of Jesus, and good intentions ought to be respected, however drolly they may turn out." It was apparent this sympathy was grateful to the old saint, for he was moved to a more confidential tone. Meditatively, he stroked his long white beard, then said with indignation, "If only they would not claim Sib with us, we could stand it. But as it is, for centuries we have felt like fools. It is particularly embarrassing for me, of course, being on the wicket. For to cap it all, Jurgen, the little wretches die, and come to heaven impudent as sparrows, and expect me to let them in. From their thumbscrewings and their auto-da-fés, and from their massacres and patriotic sermons and holy wars, and from every manner of abomination, they come to me smirking. And millions upon millions of them, Jurgen. There is no form of cruelty or folly that has not come to me for praise, and no sort of criminal idiot who has not claimed fellowship with me, who was an apostle and a gentleman. Why, Jurgen, you may not believe it, but there was an eminent bishop came to me only last week in the expectation I was going to admit him, and I with the full record of his work for temperance, all fairly written out and in my hand." Now Jurgen was surprised. "But temperance is surely a virtue, St. Peter." "Ah, but his notion of temperance, and his filthy ravings to my face, as though he were talking in some church or other. Why, the slavering little blasphemer! To my face he spoke against the first of my Master's miracles, and against the last injunction which was laid upon us 12, spluttering that the wine was unfermented. To me he said this, look you, Jurgen, to me, who drank of that noble wine at Cana, and equally of that sustaining wine we had in the little upper room in Jerusalem when the hour of trial was near and our Master would have us at our best. With me, who have since tasted of that unimaginable wine which the Master promised us in his kingdom, the busy wretch would be arguing, and would have convinced me, in the face of all my memories, that my master, who was a man among men, was nourished by such thin swill as bred this niggling, brawling wretch to plague me. Well, but indeed, St. Peter, there is no denying that wine is often misused. So he informed me, Jurgen, and I told him, by that argument, he would prohibit the making of bishops, for reasons he would find in the mirror, and that, remembering what happened at the crucifixion, he would clap every lumber dealer into jail. So they took him away, still slavering, said St. Peter wearily. He was threatening to have somebody else elected in my place when I last heard him, but that was only old habit. I do not think, however, that I encountered any such bishop, sir, down yonder. In the hell of your fathers? Oh, no. Your fathers meant well, but their notions were limited. No, we have quite another eternal home for these blasphemers, in a region that was fitted out long ago when the need grew pressing to provide a place for zealous churchmen. And who devised this place, St. Peter? As a very special favor, we 12, to whom is imputed the beginning and the patronizing of such abominations, were permitted to design and furnish this place. And, of course, we put it in charge of our former confrere, Judas. He seemed the appropriate person. Equally, of course, we put a very special roof upon it, the best imitation which we could contrive of the war roof, so that none of those grinning cherubs could see what long reward it was we 12 who founded Christianity had contrived for these blasphemers. Well, doubtless that was wise. And if we 12 had our way, there would be just such another roof kept always over earth, for the slavering madman has left a many like him clamoring and spewing about the churches that were named for us 12, and in the pulpits of the churches that were named for us, and we find it embarrassing. It is the doctrine of Mahon they splutter, and not any doctrine that was ever preached or even heard of, and they ought to say it fairly, instead of libeling us who are apostles and gentlemen. But thus it is that the rascals make free with our names, and the cherubs keep track of these antics and poke fun at us. So that it is not all pleasure, this being a holy apostle in heaven, Jurgen, though once we 12 were happy enough. And St. Peter sighed. One thing I did not understand, sir, and that was when you spoke just now of the war roof. It is a stone roof, made of the 2 tablets handed down at Sinai, which God fits over earth whenever men go to war. For he is merciful, and many of us here remember that once upon a time we were men and women. So when men go to war, God screens the sight of what they do, because he wishes to be merciful to us. That must prevent, however, the assent of all prayers that are made in wartime. Why, but of course, that is the roof's secondary purpose, replied St. Peter. What else would you expect when the Master's teachings are being flouted? Rumors get through, though, somehow, and horribly preposterous rumors. For instance, I have actually heard that in wartime prayers are put up to the Lord God to back his favorites and take part in the murdering. Not, said the good saint in haste, that I would believe even a Christian bishop to be capable of such blasphemy. I merely want to show you, Jurgen, what wild stories get about. Still, I remember back in Cappadocia. And then St. Peter slapped his thigh. But you would keep me gossiping here forever, Jurgen, with the souls lining up at the main entrance like ants that swarm to molasses. Come, out of heaven with you, Jurgen, and back to whatever place you imagine will restore you to your proper illusions, and let me be returning to my duties. Well then, St. Peter, I imagine Amnerin Heath, where I flung away my mother's last gift to me. And Amnerin Heath it is, said St. Peter, as he thrust Jurgen through the small private door that was carved with fishes in bas-relief. And Jurgen saw that the saint spoke truthfully. End of chapter 22. Chapter 43 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 43, Postures Before a Shadow. Thus Jurgen stood again upon Amnerin Heath, and again it was Walburga's Eve, when almost anything is rather more than likely to happen, and the low moon was bright, so that the shadow of Jurgen was long and thin. And Jurgen searched for the gold cross that he had worn through the motives of sentiment, but he could not find it, nor did he ever recover it. But barberry bushes and the thorns of barberry bushes he found in great plenty, as he searched vainly. All the while that he searched, the shirt of Nessus glittered in the moonlight, and the shadow of Jurgen streamed long and thin, and every movement that was made by Jurgen the shadow parodied. And as always, it was the shadow of a lean woman, with her head wrapped in a towel. Now Jurgen regarded this shadow, and to Jurgen it was abhorrent. "Oh, Mother Sarita," says he, "for a whole year your shadow has dogged me. Many lands we have visited, and many sights we have seen. And at the end all that we have done is a tale that is told, and it is a tale that does not matter. So I stand where I stood at the beginning of my foiled journeying. The gift you gave me has availed me nothing, and I do not care whether I be young or old, and I have lost all that remained to me of my mother and of my mother's love, and I have betrayed my mother's pride in me, and I am weary." Now a little whispering gathered upon the ground, as though dead leaves were moving there, and the whispering augmented, because this was upon Walburga's Eve, when almost anything is rather more than likely to happen, and the whispering became the ghost of a voice. "You flattered me very cunningly, Jurgen, for you are a monstrous clever fellow." This it was that the voice said dryly. "A number of people might say that with tolerable justice," Jurgen declared, "and yet I guess who speaks. As for flattering you, godmother, I was only joking that day in Glathian. In fact, I was careful to explain as much. The moment I noticed your shadow seemed interested in my idle remarks, and was writing them all down in a notebook. Oh no, I can assure you I trafficked quite honestly, and have dealt fairly everywhere. For the rest, I really am very clever. It would be foolish of me to deny it." "Vain fool," said the voice of Mother Sarita. Jurgen replied, "It may be that I am vain, but it is certain that I am clever, and even more certain is the fact that I am weary. For, look you, in the tinsel of my borrowed youth, I have gone romancing through the world, and into lands unvisited by other men have I ventured, playing at spillikins with women and gear and with the welfare of kingdoms. And into hell have I fallen, and into heaven have I climbed, and into the place of the Lord God himself have I crept stealthily, and nowhere have I found what I desired. Nor do I know what my desire is even now. But I know that it is not possible for me to become young again, whatever I may appear to others." "Indeed, Jurgen, youth has passed out of your heart, beyond the reach of Leshy, and the nearest you can come to regaining youth is to behave childishly." "Oh, godmother, but do give rein to your better instincts and all that sort of thing, and speak with me more candidly. Come now, dear lady, there should be no secrets between you and me. In Luki, you were reported to be Cybele, the great Restia, the mistress of every tangible thing. In Cocaine they spoke of you as Esred, and at Camiliard Merlin called you Adaris, dark mother of the little gods. Well, but at your home in the forest, where I first had the honor of making your acquaintance, godmother, you told me you were Sarita, who takes the color out of things and controls all Wednesdays. Now these anagrams bewilder me, and I desire to know you frankly for what you are." "It may be that I am all these. Meanwhile I bleach, and sooner or later I bleach everything. It may be that some day, Jurgen, I shall even take the color out of a fool's conception of himself." "Yes, yes, but just between ourselves, godmother, is it not this shadow of you that prevents my entering quite into the appropriate emotion, the spirit of the occasion, as one might say, and robs my life of the zest which other persons apparently get out of living? Come now, you know it is. Well, and for my part, godmother, I love a jest as well as any man breathing, but I do prefer to have it intelligible." "Now let me tell you something plainly, Jurgen." Mother Sarita cleared her invisible throat and began to speak rather indignantly. "Well, godmother, if you will pardon my frankness, I do not think it is quite nice to talk about such things, and certainly not with so much candor. However, dismissing these considerations of delicacy, let us revert to my original question. You have given me youth and all the appurtenances of youth, and therewith you have given too, in your joking way, which nobody appreciates more heartily than I, a shadow that renders all things not quite satisfactory, not wholly to be trusted, not to be met with frankness. Now, as you understand, I hope, I concede the jest. I do not for a moment deny it is a master-stroke of humor. But after all, just what exactly is the point of it? What does it mean? It may be that there is no meaning anywhere. Could you face that interpretation, Jurgen? No, said Jurgen. I have faced God and devil, but that I will not face. No more would I, who have so many names, face that. You jested with me, so I jest with you. Probably Cochet jests with all of us. And he, no doubt, even Cochet, who made things as they are, is in turn the butt of some larger jest. He may be, certainly, said Jurgen. Yet, on the other hand, about these matters I do not know. How should I? But I think that all of us take part in a moving and a shifting and a reasoned using of the things which are Cochet's, a using such as we do not comprehend and are not fit to comprehend. That is possible, said Jurgen, but none the less. It is as a chessboard whereon the pieces move diversely, the knights leaping sidewise, and the bishops darting obliquely, and the rooks charging straight forward, and the pawns laboriously hobbling from square to square, each at the player's will. There is no discernible order. All to the onlooker is manifestly in confusion, but to the player there is a meaning in the disposition of the pieces. I do not deny it. Still, one must grant, and I think it is as though each of the pieces, even the pawns, had a chessboard of his own, which moves as he is moved, and whereupon he moves the pieces to suit his will, in the very moment wherein he is moved willy-nilly. You may be right, yet even so, and Cochet, who directs this infinite moving of puppets, may well be the futile, harried king in some yet larger game. Now, certainly, I cannot contradict you, but at the same time, so goes this criss-cross multitudinous moving as far as thought can reach, and beyond that the moving goes. All moves uncomprehendingly, and to the sound of laughter. For all moves in consonance with a higher power that understands the meaning of the movement, and each moves the pieces before him in consonance with his ability. So the game is endless and ruthless, and there is merriment overhead, but it is very far away. Nobody is more willing to concede that these are handsome fancies, Mother Sarita, but they make my head ache. Moreover, 2 people are needed to play chess, and your hypothesis does not provide anybody with an antagonist. Lastly, and above all, how do I know there is a word of truth in your high-sounding fancies? How can any of us know anything? And what is Jurgen, that his knowing or his not knowing should matter to anybody? Jurgen slapped his hands together. Ha, Mother Sarita, says he, but now I have you. It is that, precisely that damnable question, which your shadow has been whispering to me from the beginning of your companionship. And I am through with you. I will have no more of your gifts, which are purchased at the cost of hearing that whisper. I am resolved henceforward to be as other persons, and to believe implicitly in my own importance. But have you any reason to blame me? I restored you to your youth, and when, just at the passing of that replevant Wednesday which I loaned, you rebuked the Countess Dorothy very edifyingly, I was pleased to find a man so chaste, and therefore I continued my grant of youth. Ah, yes, said Jurgen, then that was the way of it. You were pleased, just in the nick of time, by my virtuous rebuke of the woman who tempted me. Yes, to be sure. Well, well, come now, you know, that is very gratifying. None the less, your chastity, however unusual, has proved a barren virtue. For what have you made of a year of youth? Why, each thing that every man of 40-odd by ordinary regrets having done, you have done again, only more swiftly, compressing the follies of a quarter of a century into the space of 1 year. You have sought bodily pleasures. You have made jests. You have asked many idle questions. and you have doubted all things, including Jurgen. In the face of your memories, in the face of what you probably considered cordial repentance, you have made of your second youth just nothing. Each thing that every man of 40-odd regrets having done, you have done again." "Yes, it is undeniable that I remarried," said Jurgen. "Indeed, now I think of it, there was Anaitis and Chloris and Florimel, so that I have married thrice in 1 year. But I am largely the victim of heredity, you must remember, since it was without consulting me that Smoit of Glathian perpetuated his characteristics." "Your marriages I do not criticize, for each was in accordance with the custom of the country. The law is always respectable, and matrimony is an honorable estate, and has a steadying influence in all climes. It is my true shadow reports several other affairs." "Oh, godmother, and what is this you are telling me?" "There was a Yolanda and a Guinevere," the voice of Mother Sarita appeared to read from a memorandum, "and a Sylvia, who was your own step-grandmother, and a Stella, who was a Yogini, whatever that may be, and a Phyllis and a Dolores, who were the queens of Hell and Philistia severally. Moreover, you visited the Queen of Pseudopolis in circumstances which could not but have been unfavorably viewed by her husband. Oh, yes, you have committed follies with diverse women." "Follies it may be, but no crimes, not even a misdemeanor. Look you, Mother Sarita, does your shadow report in all this year one single instance of misconduct with a woman?" says Jurgen sternly. "No, dearie, as I joyfully concede. The very worst reported is that matters were sometimes assuming a more or less suspicious turn when you happened to put out the light. And, of course, shadows cannot exist in absolute darkness." "See now," said Jurgen, "what a thing it is to be careful. Careful, I mean, in one's avoidance of even an appearance of evil. In what other young man of 21 may you look to find such continence, and yet you grumble? I do not complain because you have lived chastely. That pleases me, and is the single reason you have been spared this long." "Oh, godmother, and whatever are you telling me?" "Yes, dearie. Had you once sinned with a woman in the youth I gave, you would have been punished instantly and very terribly. For I was always a great believer in chastity, and in the old days I used to ensure the chastity of all my priests in the only way that is infallible." "In fact, I noticed something of the sort as you passed in Luki." And over again I have been angered by my shadow's reports, and was about to punish you, my poor dearie, when I would remember that you held fast to the rarest of all virtues in a man, and that my shadow reported no irregularities with women. And that would please me, I acknowledge, so I would let matters run on a while longer. But it is a shiftless business, dearie, for you are making nothing of the youth I restored to you, and had you 1,000 lives, the result would be the same." "Nevertheless, I am a monstrous clever fellow," Jurgen chuckled here. "You are, instead, a palterer, and your life, apart from that fine song you made about me, is sheer waste." "Ah, if you come to that, there was a brown man in the Druid forest who showed me a very curious spectacle last June, and I am not apt to lose the memory of what he showed me, whatever you may say, and whatever I may have said to him. This and many other curious spectacles you have seen and have made nothing of in the false youth I gave you. And therefore my shadow was angry that in the revelation of so much futile trifling I did not take away the youth I gave, as I have half a mind to do even now, I warn you, dearie, for there is really no putting up with you. But I spared you because of my shadow's grudging reports as to your continence, which is a virtue that we of the Leshy peculiarly revere." Now Jurgen considered. "Eh? Then it is within your ability to make me old again, or rather, an excellently preserved person of 40-odd, or say 39 by the calendar, but not looking it by a long shot? Such threats are easily voiced. But how can I know that you are speaking the truth?" "How can any of us know anything? And what is Jurgen, that this knowing or his not knowing should matter to anybody?" "Ah, godmother, and must you still be mumbling that? Come now, forget you are a woman, and be reasonable. You exercise the fair and ancient privilege of kinship by calling me harsh names, but it is in the face of this plain fact. I got from you what never man has got before. I am a monstrous clever fellow, say what you will, for already I have cajoled you out of a year of youth, a year wherein I have neither builded nor robbed any churches, but have had upon the whole a very pleasant time. Ah, you may murmur platitudes and threats and axioms and anything else which happens to appeal to you. The fact remains that I got what I wanted. Yes, I cajoled you very neatly into giving me eternal youth. For, of course, poor dear, you are now powerless to take it back, and so I shall retain, in spite of you, the most desirable possession in life. I gave, in honor of your chastity, which is the one commendable trait that you possess. My chastity, I grant you, is remarkable. Nevertheless, you really gave because I was the cleverer. And what I give, I can retract at will. Come, come, you know very well you can do nothing of the sort. I refer you to Sevius Nicanor. None of the Leschi can ever take back the priceless gift of youth. That is explicitly proved in the appendix. Now, but I am becoming angry. To the contrary, as I perceive with real regret, you are becoming ridiculous, since you dispute the authority of Sevius Nicanor. And I will show you, oh, but I will show you, you jackanapes. Ah, but come now, keep your temper in hand. All fairly erudite persons know you cannot do the thing you threaten. And it is notorious that the weakest wheel of every cart creaks loudest. So do you cultivate a judicious taciturnity, for really nobody is going to put up with petulance in an ugly and toothless woman of your age, as I tell you for your own good. It always vexes people to be told anything for their own good, so what followed happened quickly. A fleece of cloud slipped over the moon. The night seemed bitterly cold for the space of a heartbeat, and then matters were comfortable enough. The moon emerged in its full glory, and there in front of Jurgen was the proper shadow of Jurgen. He dazedly regarded his hands, and they were the hands of an elderly person. He felt the calves of his legs, and they were shrunken. He patted himself centrally, and underneath the shirt of Nessus, the paunch of Jurgen was of impressive dimension. In other respects, he had abated. Then, too, I have forgotten something very suddenly, reflected Jurgen. It was something I wanted to forget. Ah, yes, but what was it that I wanted to forget? Why, there was a brown man with something unusual about his feet. He talked nonsense and behaved idiotically in a druid forest. He was probably insane. No, I do not remember what it was that I have forgotten, but I am sure it has gnawed away in the back of my mind, like a small ruinous maggot, and, after all, it was of no importance. Aloud he wailed, in his most moving tones, "Oh, Mother Sarita, I did not mean to anger you. It was not fair to snap me up on a thoughtless word. Have mercy upon me, Mother Sarita, for I would never have alluded to your being so old and plain-looking if I had known you were so vain." But Mother Sarita did not appear to be softened by this form of entreaty, for nothing happened. "Well, then, thank goodness that is over," says Jurgen to himself. "Of course, she may be listening still, and it is dangerous jesting with the Leschi. But really, they do not seem to be very intelligent. Otherwise, this irritable maunderer would have known that, everything else apart, I am heartily tired of the responsibilities of youth under any such constant surveillance. Now all is changed. There is no call to avoid a suspicion of wrongdoing by transacting all philosophical investigations in the dark, and I am no longer distrustful of lamps or candles, or even of sunlight. Old body, you are as grateful as old slippers to a somewhat wearied man, and for the second time I have tricked Mother Sarita rather neatly. My knowledge of Lisa, however painfully acquired, is a decided advantage in dealing with anything that is feminine." Then Jurgen regarded the black cave. "And that reminds me, it still would be, I suppose, the manly thing to continue my quest for Lisa. The intimidating part is that if I go into this cave for the third time, I shall almost certainly get her back. By every rule of tradition, the third attempt is invariably successful. I wonder if I want Lisa back." Jurgen meditated, and he shook a grizzled head. "I do not definitely know. She was an excellent cook. There were pies that I shall always remember with affection. And she meant well, poor dear. But then, if it was really her head that I sliced off last May, or if her temper is not any better, still, it is an interminable nuisance washing your own dishes. And I appear to have no aptitude whatever for sewing and darning things. But, to the other hand, Lisa nags so, and she does not understand me." Jurgen shrugged. "See-saw, the argument for and against might run on indefinitely. Since I have no real preference, I will humor prejudice by doing the manly thing. For it seems only fair. And besides, it may fail after all." Then he went into the cave for the third time. End of chapter 43. Chapter 44 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 44, In the Manager's Office. The tale tells that all was dark there, and Jurgen could see no one. But the cave stretched straight forward and downward, and at the far end was a glow of light. Jurgen went on, and so came to the place where Nessus had lain in wait for Jurgen. Again Jurgen stooped and crawled through the opening in the cave's wall, and so came to where lamps were burning upon tall iron stands. Now, one by one, these lamps were going out, and there were now no women here. Instead, Jurgen trod inch-deep in fine white ashes, leaving the print of his feet upon them. He went forward as the cave stretched. He came to a sharp turn in the cave, with the failing lamplight now behind him, so that his shadow confronted Jurgen, blurred but unarguable. It was the proper shadow of a commonplace and elderly pawnbroker, and Jurgen regarded it with approval. Jurgen came then into a sort of underground chamber, from the roof of which was suspended a kettle of quivering red flames. Facing him was a throne, and back of this were rows of benches. But here, too, was nobody. Resting upright against the vacant throne was a triangular white shield, and when Jurgen looked more closely he could see there was writing upon it. Jurgen carried the shield as close as he could to the kettle of flames, for his eyesight was now not very good, and besides, the flames in the kettle were burning low, and Jurgen deciphered the message that was written upon the shield in black and red letters. "Absent upon important affairs," it said. "Will be back in an hour." And it was signed Thragnar R. "I wonder now for whom King Thragnar left this notice," reflected Jurgen. "Certainly not for me. And I wonder, too, if he left it here a year ago or only this evening. And I wonder if it was Thragnar's head I removed in the black and silver pavilion. Ah, well, there are a number of things to wonder about in this incredible cave, wherein the lights are dying out, as I observe with some discomfort. And I think the air grows chillier." Then Jurgen looked to his right, at the stairway which he and Guinevere had ascended, and he shook his head. "Glathion is no fit resort for a respectable pawnbroker. Chivalry is for young people, like the late Duke of Lagreus. But I must get out of this place, for certainly there is in the air a death-like chill." So Jurgen went on down the aisle between the rows of benches wherefrom Thragnar's warriors had glared at Jurgen when he was last in this part of the cave. At the end of the aisle was a wooden door painted white. It was marked, in large black letters, "Office of the Manager. Keep out." So Jurgen opened this door. He entered into a notable place illuminated by 6 cresset lights. These lights were the power of Assyria and Nineveh and Egypt and Rome and Athens and Byzantium. 6 other cressets stood ready there, but fire had not yet been laid to these. Back of all was a large blackboard with much figuring on it in red chalk. And here too was the black gentleman who a year ago had given his blessing to Jurgen for speaking civilly of the powers of darkness. Tonight the black gentleman wore a black dressing-gown that was embroidered with all the signs of the zodiac. He sat at a table, the top of which was curiously inlaid with 30 pieces of silver. And he was copying entries from one big book into another. He looked up from his writing pleasantly enough, and very much as though he were expecting Jurgen. "You find me busy with the stellar accounts," says he, "which appear to be in a fearful muddle. But what more can I do for you, Jurgen, for you, my friend, who spoke a kind word for things as they are, and furnished me with one or two really acceptable explanations as to why I had created evil?" "I have been thinking, Prince," begins the pawnbroker. "And why do you call me a prince, Jurgen?" "I do not know, sir, but I suspect that my quest is ended, and that you are Koshchei the Deathless." The black gentleman nodded. "Something of the sort. Koshchei, or Ardnari, or Ptah, or Ojaldaloth, or Abraxas, it is all one what I may be called hereabouts. My real name you never heard. No man has ever heard my name. So that matter we need hardly go into." "Precisely, Prince. Well, but it is a long way that I have travelled roundabout to win to you who made things as they are, and it is eager I am to learn just why you made things as they are." Up went the black gentleman's eyebrows into regular Gothic arches. "And do you really think, Jurgen, that I am going to explain to you why I made things as they are?" "I fail to see, Prince, how my wanderings could have any other equitable climax." "But, friend, I have nothing to do with justice. To the contrary, I am Koshchei, who made things as they are." Jurgen saw the point. "Your reasoning, Prince, is unanswerable. I bow to it. I should even have foreseen it. Do you tell me, then, what thing is this that I desire, and cannot find in any realm that man has known, nor in any kingdom that man has imagined?" Koshchei was very patient. "I am not, I confess, anything like as well acquainted with what has been going on in this part of the universe as I ought to be. Of course, events are reported to me in a general sort of way, and some of my people were put in charge of these stars a while back, but they appear to have run the constellation rather shiftlessly. Still, I have recently been figuring on the matter, and I do not despair of putting the suns hereabouts to some profitable use in one way or another after all. Of course, it is not as if it were an important constellation, but I am an economist, and I dislike waste." Then he was silent for an instant, not greatly worried by the problem, as Jurgen could see, but mildly vexed by his inability to divine the solution out of hand. Presently Koshchei said, "And in the meantime, Jurgen, I am afraid I cannot answer your question on the spur of the moment. You see, there appears to have been a great number of human beings, as you call them, evolved upon—oh yes, upon Earth. I have the approximate figures over yonder, but they would hardly interest you. And the desires of each one of these human beings seems to have been multitudinous and inconstant. Yet, Jurgen, you might appeal to the local authorities, for I remember appointing some at the request of a very charming old lady." "In fine, you do not know what thing it is that I desire," said Jurgen, much surprised. "Why, no, I have not the least notion," replied Koshchei. "Still, I suspect that if you got it, you would protest it was a most unjust affliction. So why keep worrying about it?" Jurgen demanded, almost indignantly, "But have you not, then, Prince, been guiding all my journeying during this last year?" "Now, really, Jurgen, I remember our little meeting very pleasantly, and I endeavored forthwith to dispose of your most urgent annoyance. But I confess I have had one or two other matters upon my mind since then. You see, Jurgen, the universe is rather large, and the running of it is a considerable tax upon my time. I cannot manage to see anything like as much of my friends as I would be delighted to see of them. And so, perhaps, what with one thing and another, I have not given you my undivided attention all through the year, not every moment of it, that is." "Ah, Prince, I see that you are trying to spare my feelings, and it is kind of you. But the upshot is that you do not know what I have been doing, and you do not care what I was doing. Dear me, but this is a very sad come-down for my pride." "Yes, but reflect how remarkable a possession is that pride of yours, and how I wonder at it, and how I envy it in vain. I, who have nothing anywhere to contemplate save my own handiwork. Do you consider, Jurgen, what I would give if I could find, anywhere in this universe of mine, anything which would make me think myself one half so important as you think Jurgen is?" And Koshchei sighed. But instead, Jurgen considered the humiliating fact that Koshchei had not been supervising Jurgen's travels. And of a sudden Jurgen perceived that this Koshchei the Deathless was not particularly intelligent. Then Jurgen wondered why he should ever have expected Koshchei to be intelligent. Koshchei was omnipotent, as men estimate omnipotence, but by what course of reasoning had people come to believe that Koshchei was clever, as men estimate cleverness? The fact that, to the contrary, Koshchei seemed well-meaning, but rather slow of apprehension and a little needlessly fussy, went far toward explaining a host of matters which had long puzzled Jurgen. Cleverness was, of course, the most admirable of all traits, but cleverness was not at the top of things and never had been. "Very well, then," says Jurgen with a shrug. "Let us come to my third request, and to the third thing that I have been seeking. Here, though, you ought to be more communicative. For I have been thinking, Prince, my wife's society is perhaps becoming to you a trifle burdensome." Sirs, I am not unaccustomed to women. I may truthfully say that as I find them, so do I take them. And I was willing to oblige a fellow rebel." "But I do not know, Prince, that I have ever rebelled. Far from it. I have everywhere conformed with custom." "Your lips conformed, but all the while your mind made verses, Jurgen, and poetry is man's rebellion against being what he is. And besides, you call me a fellow rebel. Now, how can it be possible that Koshchei, who made all things as they are, should be a rebel? Unless, indeed, there is some power above even Koshchei. I would very much like to have that explained to me, sir." "No doubt, but then why should I explain it to you, Jurgen?" says the black gentleman. "Well, be that as it may, Prince, but to return a little, I do not know that you have obliged me in carrying off my wife. I mean, of course, my first wife." "Why, Jurgen," says the black gentleman in high astonishment, "do you mean to tell me that you want the plague of your life back again?" "I do not know about that either, sir. She was certainly very hard to live with. On the other hand, I had become used to having her about. I rather miss her, now that I am again an elderly person. Indeed, I believe I have missed Lisa all along." The black gentleman meditated. "Come, friend," he says at last, "you were a poet of some merit. You displayed a promising talent which might have been cleverly developed in any suitable environment. Now, I repeat, I am an economist. I dislike waste. And you were never fitted to be anything save a poet. The trouble was," and Koshchei lowered his voice to an impressive whisper, "the trouble was, your wife did not understand you. She hindered your art. Yes, that precisely sums it up. She interfered with your soul development and your instinctive need of self-expression and all that sort of thing. You are very well rid of this woman, who converted a poet into a pawnbroker. On the other side, as with Point observed somewhere or other, it is not good for a man to live alone. But, friend, I have just the wife for you." "Well, Prince," said Jurgen, "I am willing to taste any drink once." So Koshchei waved his hand, and there, quick as winking, was the loveliest lady that Jurgen had ever imagined. End of chapter 44. Chapter 45 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 45, The Faith of Guinevere. Very fair was this woman to look upon, with her shining grey eyes and small, smiling lips. A fairer woman might no man boast of having seen. And she regarded Jurgen graciously, with her cheeks red and white, very lovely to observe. She was clothed in a robe of flame-colored silk, and about her neck was a collar of red gold. And she told him, quite as though she spoke with a stranger, that she was Queen Guinevere. "But Lancelot is turned monk at Glastonbury, and Arthur is gone into Avalon," says she, "and I will be your wife if you will have me, Jurgen." And Jurgen saw that Guinevere did not know him at all, and that even his name to her was meaningless. There were many ways of accounting for this, but he put aside the unflattering explanation that she had simply forgotten all about Jurgen, in favor of the reflection that the Jurgen she had known was a scapegrace of 21, whereas he was now a staid and knowledgeable pawnbroker. And it seemed to Jurgen that he had never really loved any woman save Guinevere, the daughter of Gogirvan Gar, and the pawnbroker was troubled. "For again you make me think myself a god," says Jurgen. "Madame Guinevere, when man recognized himself to be heaven's vicar upon earth, it was to serve and to glorify and to protect you and your radiant sisterhood that man consecrated his existence. You were beautiful, and you were frail. You were half goddess and half bric-a-brac. O Hime, I recognize the call of chivalry, and my heartstrings resound. Yet for innumerable reasons I hesitate to take you for my wife, and to concede myself your appointed protector, responsible as such to heaven. For one matter, I am not altogether sure that I am heaven's vicar here upon earth. Certainly the God of heaven said nothing to me about it, and I cannot but suspect that omniscience would have selected some more competent representative." "It is so written, Monsieur Jurgen." Jurgen shrugged. "I, too, in the intervals of business, have written much that is beautiful. Very often my verses were so beautiful that I would have given anything in the world in exchange for somewhat less sure information as to the author's veracity. Ah, no, madam, desire and knowledge are pressing me so sorely that between them I dare not love you, and still I cannot help it." Then Jurgen gave a little ringing gesture with his hands. His smile was not merry, and it seemed pitiful that Guinevere should not remember him. "Madam and Queen," says Jurgen, "once long and long ago there was a man who worshipped all women. To him they were one and all of sacred, sweet, intimidating beauty. He shaped sonorous rhymes of this, in praise of the mystery and sanctity of women. Then a count's tow-headed daughter whom he loved, with such love as it puzzles me to think of now, was shown to him just as she was, as not even worthy of hatred. The goddess stood revealed, unveiled, and displaying in all things such mediocrity as he fretted to find in himself. That was unfortunate. For he began to suspect that women also are akin to their parents, and are no wiser, and no more subtle, and no more immaculate than the father who begot them. Madam and Queen, it is not good for any man to suspect this." "It is certainly not the conduct of a chivalrous person, nor of an authentic poet," says Queen Guinevere. "And yet your eyes are big with tears." "Ah, madam," he replied, "but it amuses me to weep for a dead man with eyes that once were his. For he was a dear lad before he went rampaging through the world, in the pride of his youth and in the armor of his hurt. And his songs he made for the pleasure of kings, and swordplay he made for the pleasure of men, and a whispering he made for the pleasure of women, in places where renown was, and where he trod boldly, giving pleasure to everybody in those fine days. But for all his laughter, he could not understand his fellows, nor could he love them, nor could he detect anything in aught they said or did save their exceeding folly." "Why, man's folly is indeed very great, Monsieur Jurgen, and the doings of this world are often inexplicable. And so does it come about that man can be saved by faith alone." Ah, but this boy had lost his fellows' cordial common faith in the importance of what use they made of half-hours and months and years, and because a Jill flirt had opened his eyes so that they saw too much, he had lost faith in the importance of his own actions too. There was a little time of which the passing might be made not unendurable, beyond gaped unpredictable darkness, and that was all there was of certainty anywhere. Meanwhile he had the loan of a brain which played with ideas, and a body that went delicately down pleasant ways, and so he was never the mate for you, dear Guinevere, because he had not the sufficient faith in anything at all, not even in his own deductions. "Now," said Queen Guinevere, "farewell to you then, Jurgen, for it is I that am leaving you forever. I was to them that served me the lovely and excellent masterwork of God. In Caerleon and Northgales and at Joyeuse Garde might men behold me with delight, because, men said, to view me was to comprehend the power and kindliness of their Creator. Very beautiful was Iseult, and the face of Luned sparkled like a moving gem. Morgane and Enid and Viviane and shrewd Nimue were lovely too, and the comeliness of Itard exalted the beholder like a proud music. These, going stately about Arthur's hall, seemed heaven's finest craftsmanship until the queen came to her dais, as the moon among the glowing stars. Men then affirmed that God in making Guinevere had used both hands. And it is I that am leaving you forever. My beauty has no human white and red, said they, but an explicit sign of heaven's might. In approaching me, men thought of God, because in me, they said, his splendor was incarnate. That which I willed was neither right nor wrong, it was divine. This thing it was that the knights saw in me, this surety as to the power and kindliness of their great father. It was of which the chevaliers of yesterday were conscious in beholding me, and of men's need to be worthy of such parentage. And it is I that am leaving you forever. Said Jurgen, I could not see all this in you, not quite all this, because of a shadow that followed me. Now it is too late, and this is a sorrowful thing which is happening. I am become a rudderless boat that goes from wave to wave. I am turned to unfertile dust which a whirlwind makes coherent, and presently lets fall. And so farewell to you, Queen Guinevere, for it is a sorrowful thing and a very unfair thing that is happening. Thus he cried farewell to the daughter of Gogir-Vengar, and instantly she vanished like the flame of a blown-out altar candle. End of chapter 45. Chapter 46, of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 46, The Desire of Anaitis. And again Koschei waved his hand. Then came to Jurgen a woman who was strangely gifted and perverse. Her dark eyes glittered. Upon her head was a network of red coral, with branches radiating downward, and her tunic was of two colors, being shot with black and crimson, curiously mingled. And Anaitis also had forgotten Jurgen, or else she did not recognize him in this man of 40-and-something. And again belief awoke in Jurgen's heart that this was the only woman whom Jurgen had really loved, as he listened to Anaitis and to her talk of marvelous things. Of the lore of Thais she spoke, and of the schooling of Sappho, and of the secrets of Rhodope, and of the mourning for Adonis, and the refrain of all her talking was not changed. For we have but a little while to live, and none knows his fate thereafter, so that a man possesses nothing, certainly, save a brief loan of his own body, and yet the body of a man is capable of much curious pleasure, as thus and thus, says she. And the bright-colored pensive woman spoke with antique directness of matters that Jurgen, being no longer a scapegrace of 21, found rather embarrassing. Come, come, thinks he, but it will never do to seem provincial. I believe that I am actually blushing. Aloud he said, Sweetheart, there was, why, not a half-hour since, a youth who sought quite zealously for the overmastering frenzies you prattle about, but candidly he could not find the flesh whose touch would rouse insanity. The lad had opportunities, too, let me tell you. I recall with tenderness the glitter of eyes and hair, and the gay garments, and the soft voices of those fond, foolish women even now. But he went from one pair of lips to another with an ardor that was always half-feigned, and with protestations which were conscious echoes of some romance or other. Such escapades were pleasant enough, but they were not very serious after all, for these things concerned his body alone, and I am more than an edifice of viands reared by my teeth. To pretend that what my body does or endures is of importance seems rather silly nowadays. I prefer to regard it as a necessary beast of burden which I maintain, at considerable expense and trouble. So I shall make no more pother about it. But then again Queen Anaitis spoke of marvelous things, and he listened fair-mindedly, for the queen spoke now of that which was hers to share with him. "Well, I have heard," says Jurgen, "that you have a notable residence in Cocaine. But that is only a little country place, to which I sometimes repair in summer, in order to live rustically. No, Jurgen, you must see my palaces. In Babylon I have a palace where many abide with cords about them and burn bran for perfume, while they await that thing which is to befall them. In Armenia I have a palace surrounded by vast gardens, where only strangers have the right to enter. They there receive a hospitality that is more than gallant. In Paphos I have a palace wherein is a little pyramid of white stone, very curious to see. But still more curious is the statue in my palace at Amathus of a bearded woman, which displays other features that women do not possess. And in Alexandria I have a palace that is tended by 36 exceedingly wise and sacred persons, and wherein it is always night. And there folks seek for monstrous pleasures, even at the price of instant death, and win to both of these swiftly. Everywhere my palaces stand upon high places near the sea, so they are beheld from afar by those whom I hold dearest, my beautiful, broad-chested mariners, who do not fear even me, but know that in my palaces they will find notable employment. For I must tell you of what it is to be encountered within these places that are mine, and of how pleasantly we pass our time there." Then she told him. Now he listened more attentively than ever, and his eyes were narrowed, and his lips were lax and motionless and foolish-looking, and he was deeply interested. For Anaitis had thought of some new diversions since their last meeting, and to Jurgen, even at 40 and something, this queen's voice was all a horrible and strange and lovely magic. "She really tempts very nicely, too," he reflected with a sort of pride in her. Then Jurgen growled and shook himself, half angrily, and he tweaked the ear of Queen Anaitis. "Sweetheart," says he, "you paint a glowing picture, but you are shrewd enough to borrow your pigments from the daydreams of inexperience. What you prattle about is not at all as you describe it. You forget you are talking to a widely married man of varied experience. Moreover, I shudder to think of what might happen if Lisa were to walk in unexpectedly. And for the rest, all this to-do over nameless delights and unspeakable caresses and other anonymous antics seems rather naive. My ears are beset by eloquent gray hairs which plead at closer quarters than does that fibbing little tongue of yours. And so be off with you." With that, Queen Anaitis smiled very cruelly, and she said, "Farewell to you, then, Jurgen, for it is I that am leaving you forever. Henceforward you must fret away much sunlight by interminably shunning discomfort and by indulging tepid preferences. For I, and none but I, can waken that desire which uses all of a man, and so wastes nothing, even though it leave that favoured man forever after like wan ashes in the sunlight. And with you I have no more concern, for it is I that am leaving you forever. Join with your greying fellows, then, and help them to affront the clean, sane sunlight by making guilds and laws and solemn phrases wherewith to rid the world of me. I, Anaitis, laugh, and my heart is a wave in the sunlight, for there is no power like my power, and no living thing which can withstand my power. And those who deride me, as I well know, are but the dead, dry husks that a wind moves with hissing noises while I harvest in open sunlight. For I am the desire that uses all of a man, and it is I that am leaving you forever." Said Jurgen, "I could not see all this in you, not quite all this, because of a shadow that followed me. Now it is too late, and this is a sorrowful thing which is happening. I am become a puzzled ghost who furtively observes the doings of loud-voiced, ruddy persons, and I am a compact of weariness and apprehension, for I no longer discern what thing is I, nor what is my desire, and I fear that I am already dead. So farewell to you, Queen Anaitis, for this too is a sorrowful thing, and a very unfair thing that is happening." Thus he cried farewell to the sun's daughter, and all the colours of her loveliness flickered and merged into the likeness of a tall thin flame that aspired, and then this flame was extinguished. End of chapter 46. Chapter 47 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 47, The Vision of Helen. And for the third time Koshchei waved his hand. Now came to Jurgen a gold-haired woman, clothed all in white. She was tall and lovely and tender to regard, and hers was not the red and white comeliness of many ladies that were famed for beauty, but rather it had the even glow of ivory. Her nose was large and high in the bridge. Her flexible mouth was not of the smallest. And yet, whatever other persons might have said, to Jurgen this woman's countenance was in all things perfect, and beholding her, Jurgen kneeled. He hid his face in her white robe, and he stayed thus without speaking for a long while. "Lady of my vision," he said, and his voice broke, "there is that in you which wakes old memories. For now, assuredly, I believe your father was not Dom Manuel, but that ardent bird which nestled very long ago in Leda's bosom. And now Troy's sons are all in Hades' keeping, in the world below. Fire has consumed the walls of Troy, and the years have forgotten her tall conquerors. But still you are bringing woe on woe to hapless sufferers." And again his voice broke, for the world seemed cheerless and like a house that none has lived in for a great while. Queen Helen, the delight of gods and men, replied nothing at all, because there was no need, inasmuch as the man who has once glimpsed her loveliness is beyond saving, and beyond the desire of being saved. "Tonight," says Jurgen, "as once through the grey art of Phobeter, now through the will of Koshchei, it appears that you stand within arm's reach. Ha, lady, were that possible, and I know very well it is not possible, whatever my senses may report, I am not fit to mate with your perfection. At the bottom of my heart, I no longer desire perfection, for we who are taxpayers, as well as immortal souls, must live by politic evasions and formulae and catchwords that fret away our lives as moths waste a garment. We fall insensibly to common sense as to a drug, and it dulls and kills whatever in us is rebellious and fine and unreasonable. And so you will find no man of my years with whom living is not a mechanism which gnaws away time unprompted. For within this hour I have become again a creature of use and wont. I am the lackey of prudence and half-measures, and I have put my dreams upon an allowance. Yet even now I love you more than I love books and indolence and flattery and the charitable wine which cheats me into a favorable opinion of myself. What more can an old poet say? For that reason, lady, I pray you begone, because your loveliness is a taunt which I find unendurable." But his voice yearned, because this was Queen Helen, the delight of gods and men who regarded him with grave, kind eyes. She seemed to view, as one appraises the pattern of an unrolled carpet, every action of Jurgen's life, and she seemed, too, to wonder, without reproach or trouble, how men could be so foolish, and of their own accord become so miry. "Oh, I have failed my vision," cries Jurgen. "I have failed, and I know very well that every man must fail, and yet my shame is no less bitter, for I am transmuted by time's handling. I shudder at the thought of living day in and day out with my vision, and so I will have none of you for my wife." Then, trembling, Jurgen raised toward his lips the hand of her who was the world's darling. "And so, farewell to you, Queen Helen. Oh, very long ago I found your beauty mirrored in a wanton's face, and often in a woman's face I have found one or another feature wherein she resembled you, and for the sake of it have lied to that woman glibly. And all my verses, as I know now, were vain enchantments striving to evoke that hidden loveliness of which I knew by dim report alone. Oh, all my life was a foiled quest of you, Queen Helen, and an unsatiated hungering. And for a while I served my vision, honoring you with clean-handed deeds. Yes, certainly, it should be graved upon my tomb, Queen Helen ruled this earth while it stayed worthy. But that was very long ago. And so farewell to you, Queen Helen. Your beauty has been to me as a robber that stripped my life of joy and sorrow, and I desire not ever to dream of your beauty any more, for I have been able to love nobody. And I know that it is you who have prevented this, Queen Helen, at every moment of my life, since the disastrous moment when I first seemed to find your loveliness in the face of Madame Dorothy. It is the memory of your beauty, as I then saw it mirrored in the face of a Jill flirt, which has enfeebled me for such honest love as other men give women. And I envy these other men, for Jurgen has loved nothing, not even you, not even Jurgen, quite wholeheartedly. And so farewell to you, Queen Helen. Hereafter I rove no more a-questing anything. Instead, I potter after hearthside comforts, and play the physician with myself, and strive painstakingly to make old bones. And no man's notion anywhere seems worth a cup of mulled wine, and for the sake of no notion would I endanger the routine which so hideously bores me. For I am transmuted by time's handling. I have become the lackey of prudence and half-measures, and it does not seem fair, but there is no help for it. So it is necessary that I now cry farewell to you, Queen Helen, for I have failed in the service of my vision, and I deny you utterly." Thus he cried farewell to the Swan's daughter, and Queen Helen vanished as a bright mist passes, not departing swiftly as had departed Queen Guinevere and Queen Anaitis, and Jurgen was alone with the black gentleman, and to Jurgen the world seemed cheerless, like a house that none has lived in for a great while. End of chapter 47. Chapter 48, of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 48, Candid Opinions of Dame Lisa. "Hey, sirs," observes Koshchei the Deathless, "but some of us are certainly hard to please." And now Jurgen was already intent to shrug off his display of emotion. "In selecting a wife, sir," submitted Jurgen, "there are all sorts of matters to be considered." Then bewilderment smote him, for it occurred to Jurgen that his previous commerce with these three women was patently unknown to Koshchei. Why, Koshchei, who made all things as they are, Koshchei no less, was now doing for Jurgen Koshchei's utmost, and that utmost amounted to getting for Jurgen what Jurgen had once, with the aid of youth and impudence, got for himself. Not even Koshchei, then, could do more for Jurgen that might be accomplished by that youth and impudence and tendency to pry into things generally which Jurgen had just relinquished as over-restless nuisances. Jurgen drew the inference and shrugged. Decidedly, cleverness was not at the top. However, there was no pressing need to enlighten Koshchei, and no wisdom in attempting it. "For you must understand, sir," continued Jurgen smoothly, "that whatever the first impulse of the moment, it was apparent to any reflective person that in the past of each of these ladies there was much to suggest inborn inaptitude for domestic life. And I am a peace-loving fellow, sir. Nor do I hold with moral laxity, now that I am 40-odd, except, of course, in talk when it promotes sociability, and in verse-making wherein it is esteemed as a conventional ornament. Still, Prince, the chance I lost. I do not refer to matrimony, you conceive. But in the presence of these famous fair ones, now departed from me forever, with what glowing words I ought to have spoken, upon a wondrous ladder of tropes, metaphors, and recondite allusions, to what stylistic heights of Asiatic prose I ought to have ascended, and instead I twaddled like a schoolmaster. Decidedly, Lisa is right, and I am a good-for-nothing. However," Jurgen added hopefully, "it appeared to me that when I last saw her, a year ago this evening, Lisa was somewhat less outspoken than usual." Sirs, but she was under a very potent spell. I found that necessary in the interest of law and order hereabouts. I, who made things as they are not accustomed to the excesses of practical persons who are ruthlessly bent upon reforming their associates. Indeed, it is one of the advantages of my situation that such folk do not consider things as they are, and in consequence very rarely bother me. and the black gentleman in turn shrugged. "You will pardon me, but I notice in my accounts that I am positively committed to color this year's anemones tonight, and there is a rather large planetary system to be discontinued at 10:30. So time presses." "And time is inexorable. Prince, with all due respect, I fancy it is precisely this truism which you have overlooked. You produce the most charming of women, in a determined onslaught upon my fancy. But you forget you are displaying them to a man of 40 and something." "And does that make so great a difference?" "Oh, a sad difference, Prince. For as a man gets on in life, he changes in many ways. He handles sword and lance less creditably, and does not carry as heavy a staff as he once flourished. He takes less interest in conversation, and his flow of humor diminishes. He is not the tireless mathematician that he was, if only because his faith in his personal endowments slackens. He recognizes his limitations, and in consequence the unimportance of his opinions, and indeed he recognizes the probable unimportance of all fleshly matters. So he relinquishes trying to figure out things, and scepters and candles appear to him about equivalent. And he is inclined to give up philosophical experiments, and to let things pass unplumbed. Oh, yes, it makes a difference." And Jurgen sighed. "And yet, for all that, it is a relief, sir, in a way." "Nevertheless," said Cochet, "now that you have inspected the flower of womanhood, I cannot soberly believe you prefer your termagant of a wife." "Frankly, Prince, I also am, as usual, undecided. You may be right in all you have urged, and certainly I cannot go so far as to say you are wrong, but still, at the same time— Come now, could you not let me see my first wife for just a moment?" This was no sooner asked than granted, for there, sure enough, was Dame Lisa. She was no longer restricted to quiet speech by any stupendous necromancy, and uncommonly plain she looked after the passing of those lovely ladies.
"Aha, you rascal!" begins Dame Lisa, addressing Jurgen. "And so you thought to be rid of me. Oh, a precious lot you are, and a deal of thanks I get for my scrimping and slaving."
And she began scolding away. But she began, somewhat to Jurgen's astonishment, by stating that he was even worse than the Countess Dorothy. Then he recollected that, by not the most disastrous piece of luck conceivable, Dame Lisa's latest news from the outside world had been rendered by her sister, the notary's wife, a 12-month back. And rather unaccountably, Jurgen fell to thinking of how unsubstantial seemed these curious months devoted to other women, as set against the commonplace years which he and Lisa had fretted through together, of the fine and merry girl that Lisa had been before she married him, of how well she knew his tastes in cookery and all his little preferences, and of how cleverly she humored them on those rare days when nothing had occurred to vex her, of all the buttons she had replaced and all the socks she had darned, and of what tempest she had loosed when anyone else had had the audacity to criticize Jurgen, and of how much more unpleasant, everything considered, life was without her than with her. She was so unattractive-looking, too, poor dear, that you could not but be sorry for her, and Jurgen's mood was half yearning and half penitence. "I think I will take her back, Prince," said Jurgen, very subdued, "now that I am 40 and something. For I do not know but it is as hard on her as on me." "My friend, do you forget the poet that you might be, even yet? No rational person would dispute that the society and amiable chat of Dame Lisa must naturally be a desideratum." But Dame Lisa was always resentful of long words.
"Be silent, you black scoffer, and do not allude to such disgraceful things in the presence of respectable people. For I am a decent Christian woman, I would have you understand. But everybody knows your reputation, and a very fit companion you are for that scamp yonder, and volumes could not say more."
Thus casually and with comparative lenience did Dame Lisa dispose of Cochet, who made things as they are, for she believed him to be merely Satan. And to her husband Dame Lisa now addressed herself more particularly.
"Jurgen, I always told you would come to this, and now I hope you are satisfied. Jurgen, Do not stand there with your mouth open like a scared fish when I ask you a civil question, but answer when you are spoken to. Yes, and you need not try to look so idiotically innocent, Jurgen, because I am disgusted with you. For, Jurgen, you heard perfectly well what your very suitable friend just said about me, with my own husband standing by. No, now I beg of you, do not ask me what he said, Jurgen. I leave that to your conscience, and I prefer to talk no more about it. You know that when I am once disappointed in a person, I am through with that person. So, very luckily, there is no need at all for you to pile hypocrisy on cowardice, because if my own husband has not the feelings of a man and cannot protect me from insults and low company, I had best be going home and getting supper ready. I dare say the house is like a pigsty, and I can see by looking at you that you have been ruining your eyes by reading in bed again. And to think of your going about in public, even among such associates, with a button off your shirt!" She was silent for one terrible moment. Then Lisa spoke in frozen despair. "And now I look at that shirt, I ask you fairly, Jurgen, do you consider that a man of your age has any right to be going about in a shirt that nobody, in a shirt which I can only— but I never saw such a shirt, and neither did anybody else. You simply cannot imagine what a figure you cut in it, Jurgen. Jurgen, I have been patient with you. I have put up with a great deal, saying nothing where many women would have lost their temper. But I simply cannot permit you to select your own clothes, and so ruin the business and take the bread out of our mouths. In short, you are enough to drive a person mad, and I warn you that I am done with you forever." Dame Lisa went with dignity to the door of Cochet's office. "So you can come with me or not, precisely as you elect. It is all one to me, I can assure you, after the cruel things you have said, and the way you have stormed at me, and have encouraged that notorious blackamoor to insult me in terms which I, for one, would not soil my lips by repeating. I do not doubt you consider it as all very clever and amusing, but you know now what I think about it, and upon the whole, if you do not feel the exertion will kill you, you had better come home the long way, and stop by Sister's, and ask her to let you have a half-pound of butter, for I know you too well to suppose you have been attending to the churning." Dame Lisa here evinced a stately sort of mirth, such as is unimaginable by bachelors. "You churning while I was away? Oh, no, not you. There was probably not so much as an egg in the house. For my lord and gentleman has had other fish to fry, in his fine new courting clothes. And on a man of your age, with a paunch to you like a beer barrel and with legs like pipe stems. Yes, that infamous shirt of yours is the reason you had better, for your own comfort, come home the long way. For I warn you, Jurgen, that the style in which I have caught you rigged out has quite decided me, before I go home or anywhere else, to stop by for a word or so with your high and mighty Madame Dorothy. So you had just as well not be along with me, for there is no pulling wool over my eyes any longer, and you two need never think to hoodwink me again about your goings-on. No, Jurgen, you cannot fool me, for I can read you like a book. And such behavior, at your time of life, does not surprise me at all, because it is precisely what I would have expected of you." With that, Dame Lisa passed through the door and went away, still talking. It was of Heitmann Michael's wife that the wife of Jurgen spoke, discoursing of the personal traits and of the past doings, and, with augmented fervour, of the figure and visage of Madame Dorothy, as all these abominations appeared to the eye of discernment, and must be revealed by the tongue of candour as a matter of public duty. So passed Dame Lisa, neither as flame nor mist, but as the voice of judgment. End of chapter 48. Chapter 49, of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 49, of the Compromise with Cochet. "Phew," said Cochet in the ensuing silence. "You had better stay overnight in any event. I really think, friend, you will be more comfortable, just now at least, in this quiet cave." But Jurgen had taken up his hat. "No, I dare say I too had better be going," says Jurgen.
I thank you very heartily for your intended kindness, sir. Still, I do not know but it is better as it is." "And is there anything—" Jurgen coughed delicately. "And is there anything to pay, sir?" "Oh, just a trifle, first of all for a year's maintenance of Dame Lisa." "You see, Jurgen, that is an almighty fine shirt you are wearing. It rather appeals to me. And I fancy, from something your wife let drop just now, it did not impress her as being quite suited to you. So, in the interest of domesticity, suppose you ransom Dame Lisa with that fine shirt of yours." "Why, willingly," said Jurgen, and he took off the shirt of Nessus. "You have worn this for some time, I understand," said Koshchei meditatively. "And did you ever notice any inconvenience in wearing this garment?" "Not that I could detect, Prince. It fitted me, and seemed to impress everybody most favorably." "There," said Koshchei, "that is what I have always contended. To the strong man, and to wholesome matter-of-fact people generally, it is a fatal irritant. But persons like you can wear the shirt of Nessus very comfortably for a long, long while, and be generally admired, and you end by exchanging it for your wife's society. But now, Jurgen, about yourself. You probably noticed that my door was marked 'Keep Out.' One must have rules, you know. Often it is a nuisance, but still rules are rules. And so I must tell you, Jurgen, it is not permitted any person to leave my presence unmaimed, if not actually annihilated. One really must have rules, you know." "You would chop off an arm, or a hand, or a whole finger? Come now, Prince, you must be joking." Koshchei the Deathless was very grave as he sat there, in meditation, drumming with his long, jet-black fingers upon the tabletop that was curiously inlaid with 30 pieces of silver. In the lamplight his sharp nails glittered like flame-points, and the color suddenly withdrew from his eyes so that they showed like small white eggs. "But, man, how strange you are," said Koshchei presently, and life flowed back into his eyes, and Jurgen ventured the liberty of breathing. "Inside, I mean. Why, there is hardly anything left. Now, rules are rules, of course, but you, who are the remnant of a poet, may depart unhindered whenever you will, and I shall take nothing from you. For really it is necessary to draw the line somewhere." Jurgen meditated this clemency, and with a sick heart he seemed to understand. "Yes, that is probably the truth, for I have not retained the faith, nor the desire, nor the vision. Yes, that is probably the truth. Well, at all events, Prince, I very unfeignedly admired each of the ladies to whom you were friendly enough to present me, and I was greatly flattered by their offers. More than generous, I thought them. But it really would not do for me to take up with any one of them now. For Lisa is my wife, you see. A great deal has passed between us, sir, in the last 10 years, and I have been a sore disappointment to her in many ways, and I am used to her." Then Jurgen considered, and regarded the black gentleman with mingled envy and commiseration. "Why, no, you probably would not understand, sir, on account of your not being, I suppose, a married person. But I can assure you it is always pretty much like that." "I lack grounds to dispute your aphorism," observed Koshchei, "inasmuch as matrimony was certainly not included in my doom. None the less, to a bystander, the conduct of you both appears remarkable. I could not understand, for example, just how your wife proposed to have you keep out of her sight forever and still have supper with her tonight, nor why she should desire to sup with such a reprobate as she described with unbridled pungency and disapproval. Ah, but again, it is always pretty much like that, sir. And the truth of it, Prince, is a great symbol. The truth of it is, we have lived together so long that my wife has become rather foolishly fond of me. So she is not, as one might say, quite reasonable about me. No, sir, it is the fashion of women to discard civility toward those for whom they suffer most willingly. And whom a woman loveth, she chasteneth, after a good precedent. But her talking, Jurgen, has nowhere any precedent. Why, it deafens, it appalls, it submerges you in uproarious sea of fault-finding. And in a word, you might as profitably oppose a hurricane.
Yet you want her back. Now, assuredly, Jurgen, I do not think very highly of your wisdom, but by your bravery I am astounded." "Ah, Prince, it is because I can perceive that all women are poets, though the medium they work in is not always ink. So the moment Lisa is set free from what, in a manner of speaking, sir, inconsiderate persons might, in their unthinking way, refer to as the terrors of an underground establishment, that I do not for an instant doubt to be conducted after a system which furthers the true interests of everybody, and so reflects a vast credit upon its officials, if you will pardon my frankness." And Jurgen smiled ingratiatingly. Why, at that moment, Lisa's thoughts take form in very much the high denunciatory style of Jeremiah and Amos, who were remarkably fine poets. Her concluding observations as to the Countess, in particular, I consider to have been an example of sustained invective, such as one rarely encounters in this degenerate age. Well, her next essay in creative composition is My Supper, which will be an equally spirited impromptu. Tomorrow she will darn and sew me an epic, and her desserts will continue to be in the richest lyric vein. Such, sir, are the poems of Lisa, all addressed to me, who came so near to gallivanting with mere queens." "What, can it be that you are remorseful?" said Cochet. "O Prince, when I consider steadfastly the depth and the intensity of that devotion which, for so many years, has tended me, and has endured the society of that person whom I peculiarly know to be the most tedious and irritating of companions, I stand aghast before a miracle, and I cry, 'Oh, certainly a goddess!' and I can think of no queen who is fairly mentionable in the same breath. All we poets write a deal about love, but none of us may grasp the word's full meaning until he reflects that this is a passion mighty enough to induce a woman to put up with him. Even so, it does not seem to induce quite thorough confidence, Jurgen. I was grieved to see that Dame Lisa evidently suspects you of running after some other woman in your wife's absence. Think upon that now, and you saw for yourself how little the handsomest of women could tempt me. Yet even Lisa's absurd notion I can comprehend and pardon. And again, you probably would not understand my overlooking such a thing, sir, on account of your not being a married person. Nevertheless, my forgiveness also is a great symbol." Then Jurgen sighed, and he shook hands, very circumspectly, with Cochet, who made things as they are, and Jurgen started out of the office. "But I will bear you company a part of the way," says Cochet. So Cochet removed his dressing-gown, and he put on the fine laced coat which was hung over the back of a strange-looking chair with 3 legs, each of a different metal. The shirt of Nessus Cochet folded and put aside, saying that some day he might be able to use it somehow. And Cochet paused before the blackboard, and he scratched his head reflectively. Jurgen saw that this board was nearly covered with figures which had not yet been added up, and this blackboard seemed to him the most frightful thing he had faced anywhere. Then Cochet came out of the cave with Jurgen, and Cochet walked with Jurgen across Amnaren Heath and through Morven in the late evening. And Cochet talked as they went, and a queer thing Jurgen noticed, and it was that the moon was sinking in the east, as though the time were getting earlier and earlier. But Jurgen did not presume to criticize this in the presence of Cochet, who made things as they are. "And I manage affairs as best I can, Jurgen. But they get in a fearful muddle sometimes. Sirs, I have no competent assistance. I have to look out for everything, absolutely everything. And of course, while in a sort of way I am infallible, mistakes will occur every now and then in the actual working out of plans that in the abstract are right enough. So it really does please me to hear anybody putting in a kind word for things as they are, because, between ourselves, there is a deal of dissatisfaction about. And I was honestly delighted, just now, to hear you speaking up for evil in the face of that rapscallion monk. So I give you thanks, and many thanks, Jurgen, for your kind word." Just now, thinks Jurgen. He perceived that they had passed the Cistercian abbey, and were approaching Belgard. And it was as in a dream that Jurgen was speaking. "Who are you, and why do you thank me?" asks Jurgen. "My name is no great matter, but you have a kind heart, Jurgen. May your life lie free from care."
Save us from hurt and harm, friend, but I am already married." Then resolutely Jurgen put aside the spell that was befogging him. "See here, Prince, are you beginning all over again? For I really cannot stand any more of your benevolences." Koshchei smiled. "No, Jurgen, I am not beginning all over again. For now I have never begun, and now there is no word of truth in anything which you remember of the year just past. Now none of these things has ever happened." "But how can that be, Prince?" "Why should I tell you, Jurgen? Let it suffice that what I will not only happens, but has already happened, beyond the ancientest memory of man and his mother. How otherwise could I be Koshchei? And so farewell to you, poor Jurgen, to whom nothing in particular has happened now. It is not justice I am giving you, but something infinitely more acceptable to you and all your kind." "But to be sure," says Jurgen, "I fancy that nobody anywhere cares much for justice. So farewell to you, Prince, and at our parting I ask no more questions of you, for I perceive it is scant comfort a man gets from questioning Koshchei, who made things as they are. But I am wondering what pleasure you get out of it all." "Hey, sirs," says Koshchei with not the most candid of smiles, "I contemplate the spectacle with appropriate emotions." And so speaking, Koshchei quitted Jurgen forever. Yet how may I be sure, thought Jurgen instantly, that this black gentleman was really Koshchei? He said he was. Why, yes, and Horvendil to all intents told me that Horvendil was Koshchei. Aha, and what else did Horvendil say? This is one of the romancer's most venerable devices that is being practiced. Why, but there was Smoit of Glathian also, so that this is the third time I have been fobbed off with the explanation I was dreaming, and left with no proof one way or the other. Thus Jurgen indignantly, and then he laughed. Why, but of course! I may have talked face to face with Koshchei, who made things as they are, and again I may not have. That is the whole point of it, the cream, as one might say, of the jest, that I cannot ever be sure. Well, and Jurgen shrugged here, well, and what could I be expected to do about it? End of chapter 49. Chapter 50 of Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Jurgen, A Comedy of Justice, Chapter 50, The Moment That Did Not Count. And that is really all the story, save for the moment Jurgen paused on his way home. For Koshchei, if it indeed was Koshchei, had quitted Jurgen just as they approached Belgard. And as the pawnbroker walked on alone in the pleasant April evening, one called to him from the terrace. Even in the dusk he knew this was the Countess Dorothy. "May I speak with you a moment?" says she. "Very willingly, madam," and Jurgen ascended from the highway to the terrace. "I thought it would be near your supper hour, so I was waiting here until you passed. You conceive it is not quite convenient for me to seek you out at the shop." "Why, no, madam. There is a prejudice," said Jurgen soberly, and he waited. He saw that Madame Dorothy was perfectly composed, yet anxious to speed the affair. "You must know," said she, "that my husband's birthday approaches, and I wish to surprise him with a gift. It is therefore necessary that I raise some money without troubling him. How much, abominable usurer, could you advance me upon this necklace?" Jurgen turned it in his hand. It was a handsome piece of jewelry, familiar to him as formerly the property of Heitmann Michael's mother. Jurgen named a sum. "But that," the Countess says, "is not a fraction of its worth." "Times are very hard, madam. Of course, if you care to sell outright, I could deal more generously." "Old monster, I could not do that. It would not be convenient." She hesitated here. "It would not be explicable." "As to that, madam, I could make you an imitation in paste which nobody could distinguish from the original. I can amply understand that you desire to veil from your husband any sacrifices that are entailed by your affection." "It is my affection for him," said the Countess quickly. "I alluded to your affection for him," said Jurgen, "naturally." Then Countess Dorothy named a price for the necklace. "For it is necessary I have that much, and not a penny less." And Jurgen shook his head dubiously, and vowed that ladies were unconscionable bargainers. But Jurgen agreed to what she asked, because the necklace was worth almost as much again. Then Jurgen suggested that the business could be most conveniently concluded through an emissary. If Monsieur de Nerac, for example, could have matters explained to him, and could manage to visit me tomorrow, I am sure we could carry through this amiable imposture without any annoyance whatever to Heitmann Michael, says Jurgen smoothly. "Nerac will come then," says the Countess, "and you may give him the money precisely as though it were for him." "But certainly, madam. A very estimable young nobleman that, and it is a pity his debts are so large. I heard that he had lost heavily at dice within the last month, and I grieved, madam." "He has promised me that when these debts are settled to play no more. But again, what am I saying? I mean, Master Inquisitive, that I take considerable interest in the welfare of Monsieur de Nerac, and so I have sometimes chided him on his wild courses, and that is all I mean." "Precisely, madam. And so Monsieur de Nerac will come to me tomorrow for the money, and there is no more to say." Jurgen paused. The moon was risen now. These two sat together upon a bench of carved stone near the balustrade, and before them, upon the other side of the highway, were luminous valleys and tree-tops. Fleetingly, Jurgen recollected the boy and girl who had once sat in this place, and had talked of all the splendid things which Jurgen was to do, and of the happy life that was to be theirs together. Then he regarded the composed and handsome woman beside him, and he considered that the money to pay her latest lover's debts had been assured with a suitable respect for appearances. "Come, but this is a gallant lady, who would defy the almanac," reflected Jurgen. "Even so, 38 is an undeniable and somewhat autumnal figure, and I suspect young Nerac is bleeding his elderly mistress. Well, but at his age nobody has a conscience. Yes, and Madame Dorothy is handsome still. And still my pulse is playing me queer tricks because she is near me, and my voice has not the intonation I intend because she is near me, and still I am 3/4 in love with her. Yes, in the light of such cursed folly as even now possesses me, I have good reason to give thanks for the regained infirmities of age. Yet living seems to me a wasteful and inequitable process, for this is a poor outcome for the boy and girl that I remember. And weighing this outcome, I am tempted to weep and to talk romantically even now." But he did not, for really weeping was not requisite. Jurgen was making his fair profit out of the Countess's folly, and it was merely his duty to see that this little business transaction was managed without any scandal. "So there is nothing more to say," observed Jurgen as he rose in the moonlight, "save that I shall always be delighted to serve you, madam, and I may reasonably boast that I have earned a reputation for fair dealing." And he thought, in effect, since certainly as she grows older she will need yet more money for her lovers, I am offering to pimp for her. Then Jurgen shrugged. "That is one side of the affair. The other is that I transact my legitimate business, I, who am that which the years have made of me." Thus it was that Jurgen quitted the Countess Dorothy, whom, as you have heard, this pawnbroker had loved in his first youth under the name of Heart's Desire, and whom in the youth that was loaned him by the Mother Sarita he had loved as Queen Helen, the delight of gods and men. For Jurgen was quitting Madame Dorothy after the simplest of business transactions, which consumed only a moment, and did not actually count one way or the other. And after this moment, which did not count, the pawnbroker resumed his journey, and so came presently to his home. He peeped through the window, and there, in a snug room, with supper laid, sat Dame Lisa about some sewing, and evidently in a quite amiable frame of mind. Then terror smote the Jurgen who had faced sorcerers and gods and devils intrepidly. "For I forgot about the butter." But immediately afterward he recollected that, now, not even what Lisa had said to him in the cave was real. Neither he nor Lisa now had ever been in the cave, and probably there was no longer any such place, and now there never had been any such place. It was rather confusing. But I must remember carefully," said Jurgen, "that I have not seen Lisa since breakfast this morning. Nothing whatever has happened. There has been no requirement laid upon me, after all, to do the manly thing. So I retain my wife, such as she is, poor dear. I retain my home. I retain my shop and a fair line of business. Yes, Koshchei, if it really was Koshchei, has dealt with me very justly. And probably his methods are everything they should be. Certainly, I cannot go so far as to say that they are wrong, but still, at the same time—" Then Jurgen sighed and entered his snug home. Thus it was in the old days. The end of Jurgen, a Comedy of Justice, by James Branch Cabell.